Burke, I would like for you to give us a briefing on everything. There have been many emails and conversations from parents and all those in the community. And I just felt like the board needs to be updated on what exactly we are proceeding with.
May I ask a question? Does everybody else have a really loud echo? Would it help if we all put ourselves on mute if we're not speaking, for that to go away? Let's try that.
Yeah, I think the problem, I think it's because, Linda, are you on your computer and your phone?
I was trying to, let me just turn my computer off because I could not get it to unmute.
Yeah, so it's just Linda's going to have the echo, because it's okay if you want to keep both on, but that she'll have an echo to deal with.
Okay, I'm muted.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. As Ms. Leventis Wells indicated, we want to give the board an update, an overview of where we are, what some of the challenges are that we are working with, some of which we are being able have already overcome or working around, what challenges remain in our path and our path forward. So we've got a PowerPoint that we want to share with you, so you'll be able to walk away from this with something in your hand, because it's a fairly good amount of information in here for you to have to try to remember with me just going through it and talking about it. Some of it we'll go through more quickly than other parts. I know some of you have some time commitments to do some other things this morning. So at this point, let's go through that, and we'll try to get all the way to the end and then come back and pick up any questions you might have. Yes, Sean. Obviously, our goal, when I say ours, your goal and our goal, is to provide as much normalcy, including in-person education and extracurricular activities, as is possible for our students, while following the mandates and guidance of the state, local, and public health authorities to ensure the health of our students, our employees, and communities. Any decisions or recommendations will be made based on objective information provided by scientific, public health, and medical experts and sources. While there are other important considerations, including social and emotional well-being, the primary consideration must be the physical safety of our students and our employees. Some of the challenges: changing conditions. Virus conditions are trending upward. This constantly evolving science. What are the best practices? And some things on which we still are awaiting guidance from DHEC, particularly exclusion from attendance of an employee with a positive test that's been in direct contact with students, students in direct contact with an employee or other student who has tested positive, quarantines and timelines for teachers and students with family members who are positive or have been in direct contact with positive cases. Ensuring safety while meeting the needs of the community. The social growth, in-person support versus exposure to risk. The need for adaptability and flexibility. Limits on classroom and building space, bus capacity, and you see the DHEC guidance of 50% really only allows us to efficiently and effectively transport in one trip all of our students with Plan 1. Any plan other than that requires a second trip, and that, while it may not duplicate the 90+ minutes of a regular route, it is not going to cut the route times in half. You're probably looking at maybe another hour beyond the original route time to do the second route. Shortage of substitutes that could be exacerbated by more absences, and the age of our substitute pool and our difficulty in recruiting new substitutes. Ensuring important health and safety protocols are followed without overburdening teachers and other school staff. Determining, communicating, and implementing a consistent and appropriate response to students who consistently refuse to follow protocols or who threaten to cough, sneeze, or touch others. Possibilities of bullying and peer pressure among students and staff to break with protocol. Recognition that new norms are hard to get used to, and human nature and habit will result in forgotten or ignored protocols without there being any ill intent. Communication of expectations, restrictions, and protocols to all stakeholders, including parents who are not plugged into the communication system, for whom we do not have accurate addresses or phone numbers, or who do not want to be contacted. The order and scope of communications, ensuring all employee groups have knowledge they need that impacts them, and that they learn expectations from supervisors instead of third hand. We cannot tell everyone everything because priority pieces end up being lost in an overwhelming avalanche of information. The increased cost of funding additional absences for CARES Act leave, which is leave that is mandated by the federal government, provided to employees, that can be used up through the end of this calendar year, that in effect adds time to their already accrued sick leave if they choose to use it. Ensuring the supply chain of sanitizers, disinfectants, etc. Building community support for schools when the divide is so great between those who fear for their child's safety and those who want to return to normal. Finding ways to keep our partners engaged and connected to our district and students, mentors, shadowing, internships, etc., when we have such strong access limitations in place to protect students and employees. The simple management of all these additional protocols. Let's look at the change we've seen since the start of the emergency closure. On 15 March, we had one reported case, one possible case, because there were no estimated cases and no deaths. On July the 12th, this information is provided by DHEC, we had 7,137 reported cases, an estimated nearly 44,000, and a total fatality toll of 104 individuals. Again, the source for this information is South Carolina DHEC as of July the 12th, 2020. And it shows the reported COVID cases by age group. And if you look at that, you'll see a little bit contrary to what some individuals might believe, think, or suppose. We have 22% of them in the age range 21 to 30 and 11% in the age range 11 to 20. Then you can see the breakout there in the various age categorizations. We have some other information for you later in here about what our workforce looks like, broken down along those same lines. All right, these are the reported deaths. Again, DHEC's the source, July the 12th, 2020. And you see that obviously as the age categories increase, there is obviously an accounting there for a greater number of fatalities, with nearly 86% in the 61 and above age group. Since June 1, there's been a 436.5% increase in newly reported COVID-19 cases among the 21 to 30 age group, again representing 22% of the total confirmed cases in the state. All right. Again, as I said to you, we're going to share some information with you about how do our employees fit within those categories that DHEC reports the disease information. So you'll see that we have 7% of our employees are 21 to 30, 17.6% 31 to 40, 27% 41 to 50, 30.7% 51 to 60, 14.8% 61 to 70, 71 and above, a little over 2% of other employees. Now, when you look at our teacher workforce, you'll see that about 20% of them are 21 to 30, about 28% are 31 to 40, about 28% are 41 to 50, about 18% are 51 to 60, then we have about 5.5% that are 61 or older. You also see in that in those charts the corresponding information related to the total percent of COVID cases in those age breakdowns and the total percentage of deaths within those categories. And you can see where our workforce falls within each of those categories. Now, part of the challenge we talked about earlier is dealing with an exposure or an illness on the part of a teacher and our ability to backfill that teacher's classroom. So this gives you an idea of where in age our substitutes fit. 21 to 30, 17%. 31 to 40, about 17%. 41 to 50, 21%. 51 to 60, 18%. 61 to 70, almost 19%. 71 to 80, 7.5%. So you can see pretty quickly how those categories align with the disease reporting categories with DHEC. We have 1,666 substitute teachers. On a good day in a regular year, we have a sufficient number. But there are days in a regular school year, absent any concern for coronavirus, that we do not have a sufficient number of substitutes. So that's a challenge in a regular school year. It becomes even more so in dealing with this environment. Here's some information. Some of you may have seen this. Harvard University produced some information on July the 12th, and it's in their opinion, these researchers, South Carolina need to stay at home orders in 60% of their counties. It identified Greenville County as one of 27 South Carolina counties at a red risk alert, considered the tipping point. Johns Hopkins University researchers rank South Carolina as the third highest state for percentage of positive tests during the last week. Now, that's percentage of positive tests and ahead of any other nation. Over the weekend, DHEC reported the first pediatric death associated with COVID-19 in the state and reported 2 South Carolina children under the age of 10 having been diagnosed with multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, or MIS-C. 80% of patients with that condition require treatment in intensive care. This is a little more information that you might want to link on and look at related to the Harvard Health Institute's information that we shared with you. There is another slide, again, same source, showing those counties that they, I believe, referred to at the most highest risk or highest greatest risk. Again, you can click on that link if you'd like to look at more information there. Now, this is a New York Times report from July the 8th of 2020, where they looked at places with the most new coronavirus cases per million residents in a 7-day look back, so July 1 to July 8. And it shows South Carolina ranked 3rd in the world, behind only the states of Arizona and Florida, and slightly ahead of Bahrain, Louisiana, Qatar, and Oman. As you know, one of the things that we are looking at is the DHEC reports, the DHEC metrics on the incident rate, the trend of that rate, the percent positive test. So this is the 2-week look back that was issued yesterday afternoon. And it shows our incident rate in Greenville County being high at 462.6 per 100,000 population. The trend is high, i.e. it is increasing. And the percent of positive test, which is 18.3%, again considered high. Our overall community spread rating in accord with the DHEC matrix is high. The number of South Carolina counties rated high is 45. Those rated mediums 1. Now that's after yesterday afternoon's rating. You all remember we've had discussion about the Accelerate Ed Task Force. Both Dr. Turner and Mr. Saylor served on that Accelerate Ed Task Force and served on 2 different subcommittees within it. This is the language directly from the Accelerate Ed Task Force recommendation. And they talk about 3 models and they relate them to the level of spread. Traditional. In this scenario, health guidelines and facility considerations allow for all students and staff to return to a school building to reopen the school year and during the school calendar due to low or no spread of COVID-19 in the area and low to no positive cases within the school building. Model 2, the hybrid model. This situation is most likely to be experienced during a period of medium spread of COVID-19 in the area and a medium number of positive cases within the school building. Model 3, virtual. In this scenario, all students and staff are unable to return to a physical building due to high spread of COVID-19 in the area and high numbers of positive cases within the school building. Again, those are the Accelerate Ed recommendations related to types of instruction and organization and correlated to low, medium, and high spread. Now, if you look to the Center for Disease Control's guiding principles, broken down into their categories of lowest risk, more risk, and highest risk. Lowest risk, students and teachers engage in virtual only classes, activities, and events. More risk, small in-person classes, activities, and events. Groups of students stay together and with the same teacher throughout across school days, and groups do not mix. Students remain at least 6 feet apart and do not share objects. Highest risk, full-sized in-person classes, activities, and events. Students are not spaced apart, share classroom materials or supplies, and mix between classes and activities. Within the last couple of weeks, you've seen a release from the American Academy of Pediatrics, Guidance for School Reentry. It was released on June the 25th. They talk about school policies being flexible and nimble in responding to new information or the challenges that we have. Encourages that strategies be developed that can be revised and adapted depending on the level of viral transmission in the school and throughout the community, in close communication with state and or local public health authorities. Policies should be practical, feasible, and appropriate for child and adolescent's developmental stage. Special consideration should be made, especially for our vulnerable populations, with the goal of safe return to school. School policy should be guided by supporting the overall health and well-being of all children, adolescents, their families, and their communities. With the above principles in mind, keeping in mind all those things that they talked about, the AAP strongly advocates that all policy considerations for the coming year should start with a goal of having students physically present in school. As our policy procedure protocol, that is our objective, that we start with the goal of having students physically present in school. Again, tempered with the safety of our students. And I think you probably have already noticed what's missing from this is any reference to employee health, which obviously has a great consideration on our mind, protecting the health and the safety of our employees. Now, several groups and organizations, I think, had a similar concern to the one I just expressed, is that guidance really doesn't address the safety and health of employees. And so a joint statement has been issued by the American Association of Pediatrics, the American Federation of Teachers, the NEA, and AASA, the School Superintendents Association, on July the 10th, in that we all share the goal of children returning safely to school this fall. And we all of us share that goal. Our organizations are committed to doing everything we can do so that students have the opportunity to safely resume in-person learning. Returning to school is important for the healthy development and well-being of children, but we must pursue reopening in a way that is safe for all students, teachers, and staff. Science should drive decision-making on safely reopening schools, and public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. And we should leave it to health experts to tell us when the time is best to open up school buildings, and listen to educators and administrators to shape how we do it. Local school leaders, public health experts, educators, and parents must be at the center of decisions about how and when to reopen schools, taking into account the spread of COVID-19 in their communities and the capacities of school districts to adopt safety protocols to make in-person learning safe and feasible. A one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate for return to school decisions. For instance, schools in areas with high levels of COVID-19 community spread should not be compelled to reopen against the judgment of local experts. Share with you our parent survey results. Now, these results, because of the timing of our survey, you will recall, occurred before this great spike in increase in positive tests. And again, the survey was headed that our intent would be to be in school. If we can't be in school and there's not a vaccine available, are you comfortable with your child returning to school? And about 45% of our parents said yes. 12% of them said no. And 43% of them were unsure. And I think we can all readily identify, particularly with the unsure category, because there is so much uncertainty around this. And certainly understand those people who believe we need to return right away, and those who just don't believe it's safe to come back. And again, we've developed an option for the ones who just don't believe it's safe to come back at all in our virtual program. In parent survey, again, if we can't have a regular opening, 78% prefer a blend of e-learning and in-person to a blend in preference to 100% e-learning. 61% indicated they have childcare options or the ability to work from home on days their children are not in school. And 63% supported 100% e-learning during the 3 weeks between Thanksgiving and winter break. The question was in there because that very closely mirrors what a lot of colleges and universities were planning at the time we conducted this survey. There are employee survey results, and you see there that there's very small number of our employees that responded to this survey who had little or no concern. We had 7,418 responses out of just under 10,000 employees. Then we got about 36% said they have some concerns, but believe it's time to return to normal with reasonable precautions in place. Then we have 45% who have serious concerns, balanced by the need to educate students, that we should repopulate schools with precautions in place such as social distancing, hand washing, temperature screening, and mandated quarantines in certain circumstances. Then we have serious concerns from 16% of our employees who do not believe we should consider repopulating school buildings in any way at this time. Now that survey time frame fell about a week or so behind the parent survey time frame. Now this is the teacher response. If we are not able to have full-time in-person school, do you prefer a hybrid scenario or 100% e-learning? 71% preferred a blend, and about 29% preferred 100% e-learning. Now, again, that's only teachers, and that is a very high percentage of respondents among our teaching staff, which is around under 6,000, 5,800. So our parent option falls in two categories. Traditional program, where our objective is 100% in-person education, but we have schedules developed that could shift between 100% and 0%, including 2 days a week and 1 day a week. E-learning obviously would occur in the 0 category. In other words, when we're not in school at all, e-learning would occur 100% of the time. On the days of non-attendance, we would have e-learning support. So if students were there on a 1 or a 2, it would be e-learning support. Parent option number 2 is the virtual program. It's 100% e-learning. There is no variation in schedule, and we have dedicated virtual teachers. At the elementary and middle school level, 100%. At the high school level, assigned by class period. We have around, I believe, as of yesterday noon, about 6,500 enrollees in the virtual program. 6,500. We've established a July the 27th cutoff. So if you signed up for it, you could remove your name before July the 27th. If you don't remove your name, then you're committing to that program. On the other side of that, if you want to ensure a slot in that program, you need to have signed up for it by July the 27th. After that, we would allow students to join it, space available. Again, these slides kind of reinforce what I shared with you. If you have a chance to look at the chat, Jeff McCoy is sharing some information with you. We now are at 7,330 students signed up for the virtual program. So you see within the traditional program, you shift 100% in-person, hybrid, and 100% e-learning schedules as conditions warrant. Students keep the same teachers as schedule shifts. Students are learning in schools. I believe we skipped some slides there. Thank you. Students are learning in school with a teacher for as much of the time as is safe to do so. It is best for families who hope to have students in school for at least some portion of the time, and for students and parents who can manage schedule changes as the year progresses. There you see our 0, 1, 2, and 5-day attendance plan in our destination return to school. Those are in-person attendance plans where students are divided throughout the district into one of 4 groups. You all have already seen that. We've released this to the public. So I think we won't spend a lot of time going through that chart, but at the end, we'll try to answer any questions you might have about it. Virtual program, dedicated teaching staff. Now that number jumped, the one I just shared with you, jumped by what, about 800 students? I think as of yesterday, we needed 139 teachers. Obviously that number's changed. It's a full day schedule. It does require year-long commitment. However, we would consider transfers after the first semester, and we may consider them at a 9 weeks as long as space is available without sending our in-person class sizes over the limits we've established for them. We believe this is best for students and families with health concerns and for those who want or need a certainty and predictability in their schedule. This is what the virtual program for an elementary student looks like. That's also what the program would look like for an elementary child if we had to go to a 0 attendance day. Now, at the middle school level, their schedule will look like a middle school schedule. You can't lay it out just like this. It would mirror the kind of schedule they have in middle school. And at high school, their schedule would look like a high school schedule. Again, it's more the delivery of the instruction, the techniques and the strategies than it is everybody doing their own schedule. We want to set a framework so parents have a consistent expectation of contact and how the program looks and will work. And that's important in order for them to make a good decision about it. Here's a kind of side-by-side description of our virtual program and e-learning. So we want to try to convey to the community as best we can, when we talk about the virtual program, that means you're doing e-learning all the time. You're being taught virtually. If you're in traditional school setting, in-person attendance, depending on if we're in a 0, a 1, or a 2, you could be doing e-learning as part of your traditional school program. So when we say e-learning, that's the delivery of instruction virtually. When we say the virtual program, you're getting all your instruction through e-learning. Now, we also have some provisions in there for participation in some things that might not be done virtually. Here's a little chart that gives you some information of what we believe are the advantages of each option. And this is the 0, 1, and 2, and the 5. I think you can, I'm not going to go through all of those, but you see the biggest advantage in hybrid is we can maintain, if you look at bullet number 1, we know in a 1 we can maintain 6 feet, and we believe with great confidence we can do that in a 2. But we probably wouldn't want to start in a 2. We'd want to start in a 1 to make sure we were able to completely work through the protocols and sufficiently train our students in how to handle the protocols. All right, and here are the challenges. It's just like any coin, there are 2 sides to it. Obviously, there's a downside. These are those things, most of which you probably have already thought. That would be a concern. All right, maintaining contact. This has been the subject of considerable discussion in the last several weeks, particularly at the state level. By May 26 of 2020, only 84 students in grades 3 through 12, which where we had connectivity, electronic connectivity, or 0.14% of students in those grade levels had no contact with teachers or other school personnel. Statewide, the figure was over 2%. What you have to think about, and the context you have to put that in, and I think that was missing in some of the state level discussion, although I know that the state superintendent presented that information. We have great transiency among our students in a normal school year. This is the most current information we have. That's why it says November 19, from November 2018 to November 19. That's the year period for which we have a look back. All right, so pre-COVID, in the preceding year, pre-COVID, 11% of our students lived at a different address in November of 19 than they did in November of 18. 8.5% of the students enrolled in 19 were not enrolled in 18. So they moved in. And we're excluding there the ones that graduated out and the ones that came in new to the system. All right. Another 8% of students enrolled in Greenville County schools in November 18 were no longer enrolled in November 19. And sometimes, because of the way families might handle that leaving, we have great difficulty in finding out where they went. Particularly challenging in this COVID environment, where we know, having eventually tracked some of these folks down, they moved out of state and didn't register in the new school in the other state. So that just puts that in context. We don't want to lose sight of any student, and we put forth great effort at the school level and the district level to maintain contact. And you see that listed, kind of 3 levels there. Individual teachers call, email, message students and their parents who weren't logging into Google Classroom or otherwise not participating. Then we had school level efforts made by counselors, administrators, mental health counselors, and other personnel to contact students who have not responded. Then if we still didn't get contact, we had a district level outreach, primarily through student services, attendants, social workers, interventionists, school resource officers. We had individuals going out, making contact, in some cases in-person contact, in other cases by telephone, by text, by various means to identify and find these students. That's one of the reasons we had such a far lower rate or percentage of students unaccounted for than other districts. Now that we will have students at all grade levels having Chromebooks, that should even more greatly facilitate maintaining contact with them and their parents. Let's look a little bit at the DHEC guidance for school operations. Social distancing. To the extent possible, maintain at least 6 feet of distance between each person. Avoid students congregating in common areas. For example, have students eat meal in the classroom, or they mix in the cafeteria or their common area. And then they give you some additional guidance underneath that. Limit people present to only students and essential faculty and staff. Social distancing continued. Avoid assemblies or other congregate events. Encourage frequent hand washing with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Soap and water are not available and hands are not visibly dirty. Use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol. Strongly encourage faculty and staff to wear masks or cloth face coverings as much as possible. Consideration may be given to recommending them for students. Cloth face coverings should not be used on children under 2 years old, anyone who has trouble breathing, or anyone unable to remove the face covering without assistance. Bus transportation. DHEC guidance. the number of students on the bus should be a maximum of 50% of standard capacity. And you see some further guidance regarding that, including loading the bus from back to front, have the drivers wear face coverings or face masks, and consideration recommending them for students. In addition to the DHEC guidance and information we get from CDC, we also are in frequent contact with and get advice, information, and recommendation from medical personnel at St. Francis and Prisma. And while they might not issue a public statement as to, we recommend this course of action, i.e. this schedule, what they do offer to us is commentary on the appropriateness of our procedures, the effectiveness of those procedures, and if we were to say to them, does this schedule in your mind address the appropriate safety concerns and you believe we're appropriately protecting faculty and students, they would give us a response to that. Again, they're not going to publicly endorse a particular configuration, but they have given us very valuable guidance and information. We also have sought and continue to seek information from MUSC and other resources. So our plans at this point will require all staff and all students except pre-K to grade 1 and those with medical developmental justifications, anytime they are in transition, are not able to maintain a 6-foot distance, they would be required to be masked. Recess would take place, but without access to play structures, and maintaining a 6-foot distance unless masked. Bus transportation, 50% capacity. We'd load back to front, unload front to back. Sharing seats only with household members, and we have yet to fully determine the masking requirements for students, but the drivers would wear a mask. Meals on a 1, we would likely serve those in the cafeteria. It becomes a challenge for fans to get meal service into the classroom. But as you can imagine, on a traditional school schedule, they have scheduled classes to be in the lunchroom in accord with their normal size. So we should be able to easily, on a day 1 with 25% of our students, be able to take those students safely into the lunchroom, put them in the space normally reserved for a 100% class, spread them out in that same designated space, and maintain the appropriate social distance. In plans 2 and 5, it is most likely that we would serve in the classroom. In special education, sports, extracurriculars, and other concerns, we're in the process of finalizing those things. And you'll see here our reopening plan. You see what we've done up until July the 9th. Yesterday, we had feedback from a parent group that had 150 participants in 3 sessions. So as you can see pretty quickly here, our strategy was develop a draft plan, utilizing our in-house experts in the areas that are affected and getting expertise in public health and medical from the appropriate external organizations, putting that together in a draft, then getting feedback to that draft. So yesterday, Parent Day, we had 150. These were individuals who principals forwarded to us names from each school to ensure we had a broad cross-section across the county and across levels. Today, we will be getting feedback from the whole teacher forum. On the 15th, we will do revisions based on that feedback. On the 16th, we will give or obtain feedback from all the principals. A group of principals was involved in the original development, not every principal, but a representative group. So having made the revisions based on the community feedback and the teacher feedback, we'll get principal feedback. On July the 20th, we will finalize the document based on the principal feedback. And on the 21st, we plan to release the final document to the public, which then gives them 6 more days to sign up for the virtual program if after they see the requirements and the precautions, they wish to do so. Communication. We're also continuing this series of Facebook Live events starting on July the 21. Don't try to match up the order they're listed with 21, 22, 23, 24. It might not necessarily work that way, but beginning July 21, Tracy Hogan will be live addressing special ed. Colonel Carlin will be live addressing cleaning, disinfecting, and HVAC systems. Philip Davey or Adam James will be live discussing transportation, and Janet Loggy will be live discussing health services. Again, the virtual program deadline is July the 27th. We would make a public announcement regarding our intended schedule for the start of school in late July, early August. And this last item, we have on the calendar right now a beginning date for students of August the 17th. We are considering a 1-week delay, primarily focused on 2 things. One, this huge number of requests we're now getting for the virtual program. The need to staff that program. And as you know, we have to staff it with teachers that we reshuffle, reschedule, because now classes, enrollments in schools will decrease because they're in the virtual program. So we need time to arrange the staffing of the virtual program, and principals need time to rearrange the schools and the roles of the classes within the schools, and at the middle and high school level, adjust multi-period schedules to reflect those changes. So what we have looked at is the opportunity, the option, we've discussed this internally as we bringing this plan to a conclusion, or that we might delay the beginning of school for students from August the 17th to August the 24th. If you think about it, if we close the virtual program on July the 27th, and the numbers in it are going up like they've gone up in the last 2 or 3 days, then there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. And we want to try to do that in a way that it would create the least disruption to groups of students in either program by this shifting of teachers back and forth. The other thing that can be done with a 1-week delay is it can be absorbed within the current end date of the school calendar, because we have 3 weather makeup days in our calendar. We are now an approved e-learning district, so that any absence from regular school attendance can be mitigated by e-learning. That gives us 3 days inside the currently established days. We have a scheduled day off the day before Election Day, and we have an in-service day. The day before Election Day is an in-service or a work day. We have another one January the 15th. So we could pick up the 5 days without adversely impacting families and employees on the other end of the school schedule. And it would offer us the opportunity to make sure that the best of our ability, we get everything settled, but we don't have students believing this is my teacher, then the next day or so, no, this is not my teacher, this is the teacher. We want to try to minimize that as much as possible. The other advantage that is it gives us one more week to see if the trend continues to be this, or if it does this, or if it begins to do this. So we believe there are some advantages in us doing that. That would be a decision we would make within the next week or so to ensure that families have adequate time to prepare for that. We would likely not change the teacher reporting date. And that week that we would gain between the 17th and the 24th, if we are able to do the 5 additional days of instruction in person, which is the state requirement for it to be funded, we would do them the week of the 17th with teachers who would volunteer to come in to handle that responsibility. Otherwise, the teachers would have a little break in there between their preparing for school to start and the actual first day with students. So we're seriously considering that 1 week. There are districts in the state that have moved 2 weeks, have moved 3 weeks. We do not see a great advantage in moving 2 or 3 weeks. We believe the greater advantage to us would be, if we do anything, to have a movement of 1 week. Now, looking at considerations and next steps, we will end with that up on the screen, the presentation part, and what questions or comments or issues that you might have that we might address. I noticed that several of you asked some questions and the appropriate person responded in the chat when you asked that question. But whatever questions you might have, then we will try to provide an answer for those.
Oh, Bert, I'll start with a question that most recently comes to mind. I thought you said that we would make sure that people were able to know what the schedule would be before they had to make a decision about whether to enroll in the virtual program. Is that correct? Burke, you're still on mute. There we go.
I'm sorry. What we said was that there are a lot of questions that they wanted answered, like, will you have to wear masks? What would the start of school look like? Sitting here today, given the rising case numbers, now the number yesterday was a little bit lower than the day before, but I don't think one day could be a trend. We need to see what that trend might be. Right now, it would appear that either a 0 or a 1 would be how we would have to or need to start school.
So I guess I'm saying when it says make public announcement regarding schedule for start of school in late July or early August, could that be changed to a specific date so that they would know before the virtual program sign up deadline instead of after?
Well, the problem with it, we're saying to people right now, the really what it looks like is 0 or 1, because if you make a call today, a lot could change between now and August the 17th or August the 24th. If you'll recall, this huge spike, I mean, we were going along at a very low level, and all of a sudden we had this huge spike in positive tests. Is it likely that we'd have a huge drop? It's probably not likely we'll have a huge drop, a dramatic drop at one time, but we could have a downward trend. So any prediction that's more than a week outside becomes less accurate. But right now, it would seem very unlikely that we could begin school with anything other than a 0 or a 1, absent some trending data going down.
So if there was trending data and going down, but we were still high on all three measures, it would still have to be 0. I mean, I guess the question is, how much of a movement would we have to see to go from high to medium risk?
You'd have to have considerable movement. However, we believe, given all the protocols we have in place, that there might be a circumstance in a downward trend where we could do a 1 because of all the protocols.
If it was just a 1, okay. Otherwise,
yes, because we can, in that one, we have the 6 feet of social distancing,
right.
All those other things. So we believe that we could safely do a 1 in a downward trend. And I'm not sure that's something you'd want to do if you're still doing this, if you're still dramatically increasing. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, or just increasing, perhaps, if it's already pretty dramatic. But let me ask this question about the 1 day. If I'm a parent desperately wanting my child to return to school, and the choice is for 1 day versus 0 days, what academic advantage can you see to just being in school for 1 day? Or is it meant to be more of a social advantage at that point, given that, or maybe it's training people about how to be together under these new circumstances that could be accomplished in that 1 day. But just show me in your thinking what the value of just 1 day might be.
Well, you were already beginning to answer your question with some of those some parts of your question. For one, it's the social and emotional value of being present in school. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's the top priority. That's one of the considerations. Another consideration is, perhaps a little further down the list would be the introduction of those protocols. In other words, if we were going to go to a 2, we would be better off to start with a 1 and move to a 2 so we could train everybody the things they need to do in a 2 circumstance, because they're going to be a little closer together in a 2. The biggest advantage is the opportunity for the child and the student to develop a better relationship, having had some in-person contact. One of the few advantages to what happened to us at the end of last year was the fact that teachers and students already had a relationship that they had established over 3/4 of the school year before they parted company in person. So that ability to build that relationship, that's going to be a challenge in a virtual program. There are ways, teachers will figure that out, but the ability to build the relationship, some of the things are just better taught and better learned in person, particularly with our youngest children. So I think there is an instructional advantage and there's a social emotional advantage to at least being able to do a 1, and a 1 is a step down the road to being a 5.
Okay, and my last question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues, but while I have it on my mind, what do you think that if it's the training that teachers will receive, I would imagine that if we're answering questions to parents, we would say that, I imagine that 16% who really don't want to go back, and the teachers, and the 12%, which is increasing, really don't want to come to school, that there's kind of a natural match occurring for those who might be inclined to get that training and do the virtual. But the complaints that we had about the virtual or the e-learning not being strong enough, what are we going to do to help teachers and make sure that what they're delivering really is as strong as it can be, if they're not really inclined that way?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and kind of start the answer. Then I'm going to ask Jeff McCoy to fill in some more specifics related to the actual training of the teachers. One thing, it would be nice to assume that the exact number we need would be reduced in each school, and it would be those people that want to teach virtually. So far, rolling it out there to who would like to apply to teach virtually, that hasn't happened so far. Now, perhaps it will. At some point, we're probably going to have to assign some people to it. One thing we would encourage teachers to do, we have some number of teachers who are concerned about childcare for your young children. We have the ability, Jeff has been able to procure some technology to facilitate it, that those virtual program teachers will be able to teach from home. So one would think that's an opportunity to help someone, and we would encourage our teachers to look at it from that standpoint, that they would be in their home with their child. Now, obviously, they got to do the teaching, but that might be helpful to someone with young children. And we would hope it would be helpful to people to whom technology has great appeal. One of the issues, though, is, quite honestly, our teachers, the vast majority of whom greatly enjoy and benefit from the interaction in person with their students. And while I think a lot of teachers love to incorporate technology in their classroom, they don't like the idea of just a technological interaction with their students. So that's a barrier. But Jeff, how about speak a little more specifically about training?
Yes, sir. So, Dr. Walcon, the training, we've offered multiple training sessions all throughout the summer on e-learning tools and the flipped classroom. We've had many teachers, hundreds of teachers will have those final counts at the end of summer, attend those trainings. In addition, we're also training instructional coaches on the 23rd and 29th, who will then be able to go back and train to make sure we have all teachers trained on the e-learning best practices for those who need to support e-learning should we be out, full e-learning or 1 or 2 days a week attendance. For the virtual program, we will have, fortunately, those 5 days, just like all schools have with their teachers prior to the school year starting. So we will utilize those 5 days once we have our virtual faculty on staff to train them pretty much all 5 days specifically on how to teach in the virtual environment, how to use the tools we've purchased for them, as Dr. Royster said, for teaching from home. And then we will also be offering ongoing professional development, just like we did in the spring. Many of our teachers participated in professional development on e-learning as they were doing e-learning with students. So we will continue to work on that and we'll continue to roll that out even throughout next year for any of those students or teachers rather who might want to participate in that.
Thank you, Dr. Oyster. And Jeff?
Yes, ma'am. One of the other things that tempered what we did in the spring was the lack of knowledge going into it as to the level of connectivity we would have. And, that was one of the things that drove kind of the decision making at the state level about the rigor of what we were doing. And I think we discovered through that process we could afford to have a much more rigorous and robust expectation because we had the level of connectivity that would permit it.
Thank you.
Dr. Royster and Jeff, I wanted to know, the teachers can do the virtual, but are the guidance counselors and instructional coaches going to be able to do virtual too, or are they going to be required to be at the school?
The guidance services for the students in the virtual program will continue to be provided by their counselor at their regularly assigned school. The virtual program, for a lot of reasons, mostly bureaucratic and regulatory, it's not a school, it's a program. The students will remain technically on the roll of their school. So support personnel for them, for example, a counselor, they would remain on their counselor's workload or caseload from their school. So we don't have to try to dually staff schools and the virtual program with counselors. And in a lot of cases, the counselors and the students already have a relationship, particularly if it's a student returning to that school. Whatever we're doing about work, the expectation in the traditional setting, the in-person, would be when we're in person, we're all in person. When we're working remotely, we might have a mix of people working in person, in the building and at home. Some people have a greater ability at home to connect than others do. As I said, Jeff's been able to procure some technology that will allow our virtual program teachers to teach 100% from home, unless they just simply want to go into a building and access something there, or they just don't want to work at home. They want to work out of a building. We'll have some spaces that they can do that.
Okay, what about those that have those underlying health conditions? Will they be able to choose to work remotely?
That's an issue that will have to be resolved on an individual basis. We have within that, that's a rather lengthy plan, and as soon as we get the draft that everybody's commented on, we will send it out to each of you so that you might look at it and follow up with any questions you might have about it. It has a matrix in there that quantifies the types of leave, how you go about getting them, and has a protocol for what you do if you have underlying conditions, medical issues that might cause you, again, verified by a doctor, might cause you to need accommodations, and whether or not we can make those accommodations. The first thing I would say to people that have those underlying conditions, you need to be among the first to apply to teach virtually. Then you'll be able to stay at home. You'll not have that in-person interaction. We need to, just like we would encourage those individuals that perhaps have a younger child that they need to be at home to ensure there's an adult present in the household, we would encourage them to apply. We need to also encourage those to apply who might have an underlying medical condition that in person might be a greater threat to their health.
So does that go for support personnel such as guidance counselors also?
They'd have to ask on and be addressed on an individual basis. But it'd be more difficult to place them because we do not have any counseling positions available within the virtual program. Now, whether or not we could accommodate them working virtually or not, again, is an individual decision based on the medical information they provide us.
Okay, and you also had said something about I think the CARES Act being able to, they can utilize that as far as absences until the end of the year. Is that what I heard?
That is correct. It expires at the end of this calendar year. Again, that's not our program. That's a federal program. It has a time or a term limit to it. And I believe I don't remember if it's the last day of December or the last day of November, but it ends at the end of the calendar year, not the school year.
So they can cite the CARES Act if they have those underlying conditions.
There are circumstances for which they can be eligible for CARES Act leave or COVID leave that have to do with their own health or their care for a family member, which could be health care or it could be early child care. But we have a matrix that's going into the plan that describes each of those leaves as a column that shows the CARES Act provisions, as a column that shows our sick leave provisions and personal leave provisions, and would allow you to look at those and make a decision, an informed decision on what you might apply for. And then it has a contact person if you have questions that are not answered within the matrix itself.
Okay, I had asked the question and Jeff answered it, but I still wanted to ask it again about if you had an influx of registrations for virtual on the 26th and 27th, are you going to have enough teachers to teach all of those kids? I mean, because I see that we only have 7,300 right now, but we have 77,000 students. What if you have an influx of 10 to 20,000 students for virtual?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit if you don't mind. What if we don't have the right teachers that we need to have both places? I.e., we don't have enough that are early childhood and we have more early childhood because they didn't get access from their school. Or we don't have enough science teachers. We're probably going to ask you all to come together on August the 4th to get another update, Probably at the same time, I'm going to ask you to affirm those schedules that are related to the level of spread. The last and most important thing, we may need to ask you to appropriate some money from the CARES Act allocation that we received to employ some additional teachers beyond the number of personnel we have now to ensure we have crossover that will meet the teaching needs of both the schools and the virtual program. We also have some other costs that we're working on that related to masking all students and making certain that we have sufficient quantities of hand sanitizer, for which there is a consistently high demand and a consistently increasing cost. So what we're going to ask, I think Ms. Levinas Wells is going to ask you about a time for that, but to schedule another meeting like this, but there might be a couple of action items on the agenda, which will have given us time to get that final count on the virtual on the 27th and process the information from that and provide you a day or so lead time to look at what we likely will need to ask for, if anything. But I think it's going to be highly likely there's not going to be a one-to-one crossover of the kinds of teachers we need versus the ones that either we want or they've applied, they've asked to come, or that we have to remove, because we'll have to, just like we do every year when student enrollments go down in the school through the summer, we access personnel from one school and assign them to a different school. In this case, they might be accessed from a school and assigned to the virtual program.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I yield to, I see Lisa Wells needs to ask some questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a hard stop at 10:30. So first, Dr. Royster, you and your team, you're doing an amazing job. There's so many different pieces of information and areas to go for data and protocols and all those things. So, let me just say, you guys are doing a phenomenal job. I can't imagine an administration anywhere that would do any better than what you guys are doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
One thing that, and maybe you will have to follow up with us, but just kind of wanted to see if you had a high level answer for this. So you talked about kind of how you're getting guidance and how you're getting input and feedback on a lot of these protocols. Specific to two areas, special education and extracurricular activities. What are the stakeholder groups? Where can we look at guidelines? Where is that information coming from to help us inform how we'll provide those services? And does the delivery of those services look different than the schedules? May they look different than just the hard and fast schedules that we already have in that plan for 0125?
Yes, you've kind of answered part of your question with the last part of your question. When you think about special ed service, we all immediately think about IEPs, and they're individualized plans. So the plan for an individual special ed student may look different from simply a plan for a regular ed student. Again, some of that's going to be on an individual basis. There are some challenges inherent in special ed. For example, we're procuring the face masks that you can see through here for speech therapists, and for the teachers who deal with our students who might be deaf or have a hearing impairment, so they can read lips. That's kind of a small detail, sort of a down in the weeds detail, but I think that's the kind of thing. And a lot of them might be addressed within a group of students, but many of those are individual things. That's one of the reasons of having that dedicated time for Ms. Hogan to talk about that on that Facebook opportunity we have in the coming weeks. We also, and I think would benefit us to provide sort of a, we do this with some other things, maybe a special ed central point of contact, although it might be answered by multiple people, where you could refer a parent to a particular, say, email address, SPED questions or something like that. that we could then have various individuals answer those, because it's going to be a lot of just unique and different answers dependent on the student's IEP. The activities we have in our plan that the draft that'll go out, we've tried to line up the extracurricular activities with the low, the medium, and the high spread. And we have really looked at them as athletics and those similar to athletics. So for example, JROTC, similar to athletics. We've got another one, which are the fine arts that Bradley Wingate is heading up. Daryl Nance is heading up the athletic one. All right, arts, obviously the band and the chorus, which are certainly different in the ways that spread might occur based on the discipline within those extracurriculars. All right, so the arts, he's spearheading that. What are things that might be like the arts that would fall in that same category? Again, tied back to low, medium, and high. Then the third thing, which would be most of the other extracurriculars, well, they're kind of academic related, tied directly to some academic area, the Spanish club, the whatever, the robotics, some things like that. All right, how do we align each of those with a low, medium, and high spread? So that's our approach to it. And I think when you see that draft, when we roll it out to you, you'll see the tie-in between the extracurriculars and appropriately linking that back to low, medium, and high. The South Carolina High School League Executive Committee is meeting in the morning. I don't recall the time, but they're meeting in the morning to discuss the direction of athletics moving forward. And there are a number of things they're looking at. One, trying to get everybody in the state, I think, on the same page. Now, whether they'll take that stance or not, who knows? The South Carolina Athletic Coaches Association has put forward a proposal to move all contact sports from the fall into a newly created spring season. So there would be a fall, a winter, a spring 1, and a spring 2. And one of the spring seasons would, you would move football into that season and wrestling. And then have lesser contact sports in the fall, golf and tennis and cross country. There's a proposed, I think there's actually multiple variations of that proposal. Then there's the idea of the thinking or the proposal that you'd simply move the seasons, just move them all. Play fewer contests, limit contests to region contests. All of those things are being discussed, and I think as all of us know and see, and you and I probably have a particular interest in one particular NCAA program, but there's great uncertainty at the NCAA level. I think there's some of the smaller athletic conferences. I think one announced last week, they're not having any contest. Some of the bigger conferences within Division I have talked about, well, we're only going to have region or inter-conference contest. So there's huge uncertainty at the college level, and there's certainly a matching degree of uncertainty at the high school level.
Okay, and so in terms of, again, or what are the resources the high school league is going to work kind of collectively, perhaps, to at least share some insights and best practices? But with regard to other agencies that have any sort of recommendations based on kind of, to your point, contact sports different than individual sports, team sports versus individual sports. Is there another group of stakeholders, and are we like we did with the survey? Are we going to try to survey on issues like that? What's our protocol for how we're going to make those decisions? I mean, certainly if the high school league determines they want to kind of take a stance, then we would work with that stance. But what's our approach going to be outside of that?
Quite honestly, not only do we hope for that, but we've asked them to take a stance, because that directly relates to equity and parity among student athletes, teams, and schools within the state. So it's our hope, and what we've tried to influence them to do is take a stance, decide what it is you believe is is the thing we ought to do for athletics. It's safe for our athletes, and again, for our coaches, for our employees. What might be the safest thing, and get direction from that. Just like we seek input from DHAC, from Prisma, from St. Francis, we'd seek input from those same sources regarding athletics. Additionally, we have a primary point of contact for athletic trainers. So we get information regarding appropriate safety in regards to health and medicine from that contact. And then both the district and certainly the league has access to the National Federation of High School Associations, which is the national group that brings together. It doesn't operate in every state under the name of the High School League, but it brings together all 50 of the state organizations and provides some direction, information, and advice from a national perspective regarding athletics.
Okay. And so that's great. And I know you guys have been thinking through all the criteria, and I know that you are listening to the public. And the one thing I've said to people is that what I don't think they understand about our district is our district always wants to underpromise and overdeliver versus overpromise and underdeliver. So I know how hard you guys are working, and while it's frustrating for people to not know already, it is such a dynamic situation. I appreciate you guys trying to work, within the framework. So a couple things. So on special ed, the thing I did want to clarify, because I think when I made a call, I think this is clear. So right now during the summer, even though we're closed down, there are special education services that are being delivered in our buildings. So similarly.
Yes, it is the only service that's being delivered and being delivered in accord with their IEP and the federal requirements, and with greatly enhanced measures in place to ensure safety.
Right. So I think that's that in itself, that we are looking individually at students, and if we need to bring students in face to face because of their IEPs, we are doing that, and we have a methodology for how we're going to do that safely. I was also glad to hear you talked about the discipline protocols. I think, you alluded to how are we going to work in a classroom where kids have these new rules that they have to follow, and they don't remember to follow them. They need to follow them because it's safety. But, on the other hand, we don't want to create an environment that we think it's better to put them back in the classroom. But if we put them back in the classroom and then we have to send half of them to the principal's office for not following protocol, it's not really going to be helpful. So I'm glad that you're attentive to that and you're developing a specific plan for that, because that was a concern. So when you mentioned the teachers that might teach at home because they had kids at home, have we talked about, or have we had any community partners come to us and talk about how they might support either teachers or families, that if we are on a hybrid schedule and you have a family that both parents work, they need their jobs to support their family, are there any programs for those families or for our teachers that might get some support in childcare, small setting childcare, to help them and facilitate that switch to, from 5-day to 1 or 2?
We have had very preliminary discussions, 2 of them, with a large local nonprofit that might be the provider of daycare services for essential workers. And we believe that they might very likely include our teaching employees and other employees as essential workers. It's a little too early for me to talk publicly about the entity or to say much more than they've been very receptive conversations to this point. Hopefully within a week or 10 days, we might be able to talk publicly about that.
Okay, that's excellent. So then the last thing, and maybe y'all need to send me something on this, but one thing I heard about the e-learning was kind of the frustration that while it was online, it wasn't live and it wasn't in person. So in the protocols that you guys have developed, do we have some specific standards for the number, the number of contacts, the amount of in-person contacts that teachers are going to need to make both? It looks like you have that in the virtual program, but in the e-learning program as well, so that when you make that transition, it doesn't become, a kid sitting in front of YouTube videos or whatever. What does that look like?
In the, as you noted, we showed you the schedule for the virtual. I may have skipped over that or said it very quickly. In a zero, the expectation for our classroom teachers would be to mirror this in a zero. I'll let Jeff speak directly about a 1 or a 2.
So on the 1 or 2 schedule, obviously the teachers are teaching 4 days a week in that scenario. And so on that scenario, they would have, depending upon their planning period length, they would have 45 minutes or so a day that they would be able to check in with students. And again, in that scenario, they're going to see them once a week or twice a week face-to-face. So we would be following more the flipped classroom model in that scenario. But that would be a little different from if we're fully learning. Certainly all day long, we could follow the schedule Dr. Royster has on the screen there. And that would be the expectation that they're following that schedule or a schedule similar to that, where they're doing live sessions throughout the day. That is much more challenging in the 1 and 2 day a week, but they still would have times to check in with the kids, help kids on e-learning. Virtually if they need help.
Okay. And we'll make it clear. Parents should know if they're not getting the support they need to contact their principal, but certainly we'll make it clear that there's, from an accountability standpoint, if you're not getting the instruction that you believe you should be getting in e-learning setting, it's perfectly appropriate to escalate that, if you will, to your principal to let them know that you're not getting what you need.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. That's a good point. Our expectations are the same. That would be the expectation if they were in school in attendance in traditional setting, that they would talk to the teacher, then talk to the principal. And the same expectations should hold true if we're having to do some amount of e-learning and they're not getting that from the kind of expectation we've set out here. If they're not receiving that, they need to talk with the teacher, then talk with the principal.
Right. Well, thank you again. I'm going to have to get off, but I might have a couple other questions to send. And you guys, it's so hard to really process the amount of data that's required to take care of our 76,000 plus students and 10,000 plus employees. So thank you guys for what you do, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
This is Glenda speaking, and of course I agree with all my colleagues on the board. This is for me almost a nightmare, and I can't even imagine what Burke, you and your staff, definitely kudos to everyone. But I'm confused. I have 2 groups of parents. One group of parents are saying, I did not like the e-learning, but I definitely would like the virtual. Then I have another group of parents that are saying, mine are going back. I don't care what you have, because I think they use us as a babysitting service. That's a whole lot of their wanting to go back. My question is, since we had e-learning this summer at the end of the school year, and there was some success, why did we not make the decision to just go totally virtual? I know about the teacher shortage, but going totally virtual as opposed to all the different scenarios, and then go from virtual to the 0 to 1 day or 0 to 1 to 2 day from that angle, as opposed to allowing parents to select, because parents are calling me and they want me to select, and I refuse to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to.
And also, I have a lot of my professional parents are saying, I'm not sending my kids back. They're going virtual. So somebody on the call, I forgot who, I think it was Michelle, I think you're going to get a big influx of these virtual people because they're talking to each other. And when I still go to my different meetings, they're talking to each other and they're saying, we want virtual. So, to me, that's almost a nightmare for the school district. I don't know what to tell them, but I will not make the decision as to what they do with their child. I do know that.
Well, hopefully, Glenda, what might be helpful, you know, we had a chart up there earlier where it says, here are the advantages to this type and here are the disadvantages. You might share that with them. You're giving us some information, but to your point, you're obviously not making the decision for them. We came up with that virtual program again because of that huge demand. When we looked at that survey and 10% of our parents said, hey, there's no vaccine, don't want to come back in person. No matter how you work it out, don't want to be back in person. And so there are going to be some challenges with that. That's why we had to set kind of a hard and fast cutoff date. And to your point, I believe about Tuesday of last week, we had about 4,500 in there, either Tuesday or Wednesday. And now we've grown by, Jeff, I think that number I saw just a few minutes ago was we've grown by nearly 2,000 since last Wednesday. So, yeah, and I think it will continue to grow. I think two things will influence the growth. When people see the full plan when we roll it out and they have more information of what school would look like if they choose in person, and the numbers that get posted every day, if they keep going up, I think there's some people just going to choose to be 100% virtual because some people just, they need to know that they can make their plans once they know. And when we're talking about the in-person side, it's going to be so dependent on the spread and the infection rate within the population a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time, that's not going to be a stable platform. You got to be very flexible to be in that one. But you know, if you're virtual, that's what you're going to be every day, all day long. And that for some people, that's just easier to plan for as well.
One last question. What can I do to help you and your staff make this a little bit easier?
You know, certainly, I think one thing is this information that we're sharing with you all today, is you share that within your circle. You talked earlier about, you know, people in the community asking you about things, and I know you're very active and involved in a number of groups throughout the community that kind of all different aspects of the community. The more you can share that information, Ms. Martin-Fair, I think that's most helpful. The more you can share the information and encourage people to contact us if they have a question about it.
Thank you.
Dr. Royster.
Thank you.
Dr. Royster, this is Linda.
Yes, ma'am.
Tracy is going to discuss the special needs programs that are going to be available and how we're going to proceed with the special needs students in the various schools. Is that correct?
Yes, you should have on your screen right now a copy of that Facebook Live events we have scheduled. We have one of those solely dedicated to special ed. If we find we need to do more than one, we'll do more than one.
I know there's a great concern by many parents who have students with special needs, and they're trying to figure out what the school year is going to look like. So I hope that, and I know that Tracy Hogan will address those concerns. Also, I'm glad to see that the high school league is going to make the decision on the athletics. I've had a number of emails and concerns about not starting practices and so forth, but I look at the colleges and universities, and they tried to start early, and they now have, 40-something athletes who have the COVID virus now, as well as coaches. And we certainly don't want that to become an issue with our young people. It's important that our young people are involved in athletics, but I appreciate the district's concern and holding safety and health as a top priority in making decisions. And I think sometimes we are so ready to move forward that we don't think of the consequences that may occur due to that early start. Also, Dr. Royster, I appreciate the information you're giving out. I do want to inform the board members that we most likely will be having a special call meeting on August the 4th, and it will be a Zoom conference meeting to address all of those things that you have brought up, the possibilities of starting school a week later, and then the addressing how we're going to add additional personnel to take care of maybe the virtual and other situations that are incurred due to the data that's collected July 27th. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
And Dr. Royster, I don't think parents are aware of, and I appreciate you saying that all the schools brought in gave you names of parents. There are 150 parents from various areas of the district that have been involved in accumulating the reference information that is helping us and the district personnel come to a consensus on the best way to proceed from this point. Is that correct?
I might phrase it just a little bit differently because we gave them the basic, a draft plan, but we wanted them to comment, question, critique, provide input at things that might be missing that ought to be added, that sort of thing. But you are correct. We had, I think it was around 150. We had 3 different Zoom sessions yesterday, a morning, mid-afternoon, and an evening one to accommodate different people's schedules. We got a lot of good input there. We will have that same opportunity today for teacher forum. We're doing 2 sessions with them for convenience, for their convenience. One starts here in a little while, and the other one I think mid or later afternoon. Because before we finalize a document that we want to run out to the public, we want to have a representative group of people that have weighed in on it that will help find things that we didn't see or ask questions that perhaps we did not consider. So we'll have a much better document if we're able to do it that way, we believe.
And I think it's important to understand that one program doesn't fit all. And so therefore we have so many variables to all of these options. I know when we talk about virtual learning, it brings in the e-learning, but I think the schedule that you're showing shows a different schedule than what was implemented on March when we closed down on March 13th. I think that schedule shows that the disciplines, the classes, everything is laid out. So all of these subject matters will be covered by e-learning. There will be goals to reach in all of these classes, just as they would be in a normal classroom. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that people aren't thinking that the e-learning is going to be the way it was in spring and the way we finish the school year, where they're going to get a participation grade instead of a letter grade. And I want everyone to be aware that these virtual programs will hold students accountable, and they will take tests, and they will have projects and so forth, and that it is just as though it is that you are taking a class at a college or university where at the end of the semester or the year, you are getting credit for your accomplishments. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The rigor, the expectation, the academic measure as far as grading would be equivalent to being in school. Might be delivered differently, look differently, but equivalent.
Good. I just wanted to clarify that so parents are aware that this will be a totally different type of program than what was done in the past. And so there are standards that and goals and achievements to accomplish. And Dr. Royster, I echo all of my colleagues when they say, and we say, thank you to all those at the district, and not all the district personnel, but also those in the background that are looking and trying to make sure these facilities are safe and cleaned and etc. And I think I think people don't really understand when we talk about transporting our students to schools that ride the bus. A 60 passenger bus now will only have be allowed 30 on those buses. Is that correct?
The only exception to that would be where you could have members of the same family sit in the same seat.
Yes,
and
sir.
so it might be a little bit more than 50%, but as a general statement, that is correct.
Right. Well, it could be 60, 40, but the majority could be, 50-50. And also that doubles up on the bus drivers. And so thank you for everything. I don't know if anyone else is going to ask a question, but I know this has gone on for almost close to hour and 50 minutes. So Dr. Royster.
I do have some questions, please.
Okay.
I have,
All right.
I have some
Mr.
questions
Lewis.
as well before we get off.
Okay, well, let me go with Mr. Lewis first, and then we'll go, Roy, we'll get with you next, okay? Thank you.
So it looks like we lost Dr. Royster. Are you back with us? Okay.
Let's hope not.
I was still hearing everything you said, but somehow my camera ceased to work, but I believe it's working again now. But I can still hear you.
That's fine. I have an incredible amount of appreciation for the presentation that you did. I think, as Ms. Wells said, I really appreciate the amount of science and data and facts you're using to make some very difficult recommendations. And so I appreciate that. I think I understood from Ms. Brinkman that you guys are going to send the PowerPoint out to us. So I tried really quickly to take notes, but there's just a couple of things I just want to make sure that I heard correctly as I'm being asked questions. So one is about the CARES Act leave. So am I to understand that the district's understanding of staff members who may become infected, whether they test positive or whether they were just exposed, will be eligible to apply for leave that won't count against their personal sick time? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's a correct understanding. We don't have a slide on that in here. It's in that draft plan, but we may just go ahead and send you all that matrix because that helps to explain it better.
Okay. And I know you're working on a lot of the details on that, but would that also include staff members who believe they've been exposed to the coronavirus while at work but don't test positive?
It requires either a positive test or, I believe, some sort of medical documentation. Unless there's a provision there to care for young children. So there's a non-medical provision too. And I don't have it right in front of me. I'm hesitant to answer real specifically because I don't want to give you a wrong answer either. Okay. We'll send you all the matrix, although it's not in the PowerPoint. That PowerPoint is probably actually up on board docs right now, but we'll send you one in an email if you'd like to have it that way. Nancy's nodding across the way over here that is on board docs now. Okay.
And then you had mentioned the supply chain of sanitizers and disinfectants, personal protective equipment. So at this time, we don't expect employees to provide that level of equipment for their own classrooms. That's going to be provided by the district.
Yes, in fact, I had conversations with one of the healthcare providers last week about procuring some PPE through their resources.
Okay. The other question, I really appreciate your comments about. So one of the questions I get asked often is, I'm a teacher. I also have a child. My child is going to possibly not be in the classroom when I'm in the classroom. And it sounds like the district's recommendation for those teachers is, number one, consider teaching in the virtual academy, because then you could, assuming you have bandwidth at home to handle it, you could do your work from your home while your child is also at home. And then also that there is possibly some partnership with some other childcare providers, which I really appreciate, and I'm super excited to help you facilitate and help fund with First Steps dollars if I can. So just let me know what we can do to support that. One of the other questions that I get asked from teachers is, so if I go into the virtual academy, but I really liked my second grade classroom and I'm going to leave it to go teach in this academy, am I going to be able to go back to my second grade classroom next year when the virtual academy ceases to exist? Or am I going to have to apply to get back into my school? Like what sort of accommodations can teachers expect to be able to return to at least their school next fall?
What we've tried to say to them, because we don't want to promise something that we couldn't deliver on, but they would have a priority to return to their school, assuming there's a space available. Obviously, we wouldn't put them in a school as an above baseline. But we also would not let them bump a person that has been there longer than they have, for example. Now, as that virtual program gets larger, and the likelihood that would be sustained over a year or two, I think we may always have a virtual program, because I think that's just going to appeal to some people. But I think the size of it's going to go down dramatically when there is a vaccine or this virus, if there is some way it can run its course without one, although that seems highly unlikely. But let's assume there's a vaccine, we go back in person. The fact that we've had so many people go into the virtual, so many students, then they would, I think, in large numbers return to schools. I think that will be a very minimal problem to get them back into the school they came from. But we're just real hesitant to absolutely commit to somebody. You may go back to the third grade at, for example, at Augusta Circle. Well, maybe we don't have a third grade opening over there next year. We don't have those number of students returning, or for some reason it's a smaller size. Now, we wouldn't let somebody stay there that was hired, new to this year, but that's just a consideration. So we don't want to ever say to any teacher or other employee, absolutely assure them of something that we might not be able to honor. So we try to be very careful in that.
Okay. And I guess in the final personnel question that I have a couple about technology is, teachers signed contracts really before a lot of this was really fully fleshed out, and there's still a lot of questions. If a teacher comes to the district who has signed a contract and says, you know what, the more I think about it, the less comfortable I am. I'm part of this group that's at risk. Is it possible for an employee to get out of their contract without the district reporting it up to the State Department, or somehow taking recourse that would punish them for getting out of their contract early?
That again would be a decision made on an individual basis. We release people from contracts every year for good reason. A lot of times a spouse is transferred, for example, 2 states away. We would release them, certainly wouldn't report them for violating their contract. We release people for medical reasons from their contract at various times, so a few each year. But again, that's an individual issue that has to be medically documented, and we would consider each case on its own merits with appropriate medical documentation.
Okay. My other 2 questions are about technology. So I know that we are planning on rolling down Chromebooks to our 4K, 5K first and second graders this year, which we have not done in the past, at least not issued to them in the past, like we're planning on doing. So could somebody just, not for the virtual program that's 100% online, but for a child that's going to be entering kindergarten who is doing e-learning while they're not face-to-face with their instructor, I mean, do we envision that those 4K, 5K first grade kids are going to be spending a considerable part of their day in front of a computer? Are there any sort of screen time recommendations that we're making to kind of limit that? I mean, just any thoughts on screen time with these younger 4, 5, 6-year-olds?
Yes, that's a good point. I'm gonna let Jeff speak specifically to that.
So yes, sir. We have looked at that. That schedule release for elementary, if you'll notice, was in 30-minute blocks. But in most cases, they're not going to be on in front of a live camera with the teacher for 30 minutes. A lot of teachers are going to end up dividing that period up, that 30 minutes, in 10-minute increments for kids, and then may turn them back loose for independent, work that they would do. Obviously, because of the virtual nature, some of that work will be online, of course, but we are also doing some of the traditional things like, for example, handwriting. You really can't do online. So they'll still have if you remember, the handwriting books and things like that. They're still going to have to practice. So we're going to be building in some of those things to make sure that, they're not going to be sitting on the screen for 6.5 hours.
So you see it as a blending of this kind of paperwork and online, not solely online.
Yeah, and we would train them or the parents how to take pictures with their Chromebooks, which we can do while they're in school, which kids probably don't know how to do that. And then how to upload those math problems they may have solved by pencil, or whether they're doing their handwriting, just upload that to the Chromebook for the teacher to be able to look at.
That's great. The last question I have is just the second part of that. So now we have 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds who didn't have Chromebooks before, and conceivably we won't be having face-to-face instruction to teach them how to use those Chromebooks. So what's the plan for kind of acclimating these kids to using technology while using technology?
Yeah, so some of that will have to be done by video if we end up not starting full, if we start full e-learning, as Dr. Worsh said, or if it's one day a week, it's much easier, obviously, because we have one day a week to be able to show the kids how to do that. If it's full e-learning, then we would be, which we have a lot of videos already, but we would create videos for those parents that they would have to kind of watch and share with their students. Particularly kindergarten, just in 4K, because they may have never been in school before. First grades and up, I have less concern with, because they've used Google Classroom before, and so most of them know how to use that. But I think at that point, we would just have to rely on the parents to say, here's the video on how to use the Google Classroom, if you'll just work with your kid on training them how to use that.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
One of the other things to add to that, one of the things that we did during the e-learning in the spring, we'd have some help desk opportunities for people that need help, whether that be teachers or parents. So in addition to video, we'll provide some level of support that they might call and ask some questions or email questions.
Mr. Shamley?
Yes, okay, thank you. I have a number of questions. I hope I'll get them in the right order here and hopefully not be too confusing with them. But let me just start with my number one question at the very beginning is, and it leads into what I want to say. If today was the 26th or let's say the 15th of August and school starts tomorrow, what is it going to look like? In other words, are we doing 5-day, 1 day, 0 days right now? And I ask that question because I'm getting a lot of questions from parents about, we don't have a clue what to do, and we need to know what's going to happen. And I'm wondering why we cannot say this is what's going to happen on the first day of school as we know it right now. If something major changes between now and then, okay, there are other options. But what is our plan for the first day of school and going forward? Do we have a statement that we can issue? Do we have a plan that we can put in place? I mean, how can we address those questions?
Well, the short answer to your question is, number one, if tomorrow was the first day of school, given the circumstances in the last 10 days, we would start with a 0.
Okay, so our plan right now, we can tell our parents it's going to be all virtual.
If school started tomorrow,
well,
a lot could change in the next 6 weeks. We would prefer not to start virtually.
I think we can say all that. I guess the question I have is, because I have these questions, parents asking these questions, is what do I need to plan for? I know things are going to change. I suspect we're going to have a significant drop in the new cases and all of that, but that's beside the point. I think we should say, parents, you need to plan on 100% virtual learning as of right now.
That's a great point. I would suggest the parallel there is bad weather. If the weatherman says we're going to have bad weather, that doesn't always happen.
Right.
That ought to be an indicator to all of us to be prepared for, if you have children in school, to be prepared for what would you do if we're not going to have school that day.
Again, yeah,
or what would you do? What will you do if your power goes out? So you need to prepare for what would be the worst case scenario. And in our case, that's a zero. Okay. And if we had to make a call today based on today's numbers, it would be zero. Always best to prepare for the worst case.
Certainly. Well, I think, again, I think there's a lot of stress among parents, and we know they're all over the place. Those that can work, can't work, have child care and all of those kind of things. I've had at least one parent ask me several times, should I plan on putting my child in school? She's going to be in K4 or K5 next year. I said, I really can't tell you. I don't know. I'd rather say she's not going to be in school. Go ahead and plan for something different, because unless things change, we're not going to have school next year. And that's the concern. Now, having said that, about what is it, 75% of all parents are saying, I want my kids back in school, even as it is right now today. And I'm a little concerned about how we say to them, well, we're just being overly cautious, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, one of the things I've got is, as of right now, according to DHEC regulations, it looks like we could not have school, period. That seems to me to be the case as well. Is that right?
Right now, it would indicate we should not be in face-to-face instruction, and if we were, at best it would be 1 day a week. But with this increase, that's just very unlikely. I think we could create our own spreading event. And one thing that people have to consistently think about, and it's sometimes hard to do because obviously parents are focused on their children, but we've got to also consider our employees. And while children might not be as susceptible to the disease, and their risk might be lower, though there is still a risk for all ages of children, there is a much enhanced risk for our adults that are teachers and in direct contact with students, both from the standpoint of protecting their health and safety and from the standpoint of understanding you're talking about a group of people that, for example, if a employee has a spouse who were to test positive, it is possible under the current guidance from DHEC that employee, because they have a spouse that tested positive, could be at home out of work for 24 days total. And if we have that move quickly through a faculty, we will have nowhere near the number of substitutes that we would need to have. So there is the number one consideration of health and safety, and number two, the practical consideration of the ability to backfill an absent employee.
Yes, I've already heard of one state, I think it was California or someplace, where they were doing a virtual learning and the doggone teacher got COVID and maybe died or something like that. And so that was a question. It's a valid question, but I mean, that wasn't anything to do with school. Sort of a side issue there. But back to the other thing, I think it's important for us to go ahead and say, hey, folks, no school this year in person. If things change, then there'll be school, and we'll be ready to go ahead and have that on the books. But that'll allow us to be able to respond to folks and say, here's what the decision of the school board is. If all of a sudden the increases go to zero, no problem, we'll go ahead and we're ready to start school. But as of now, there won't be school, or at best 1 day a week. That's just my hope, and I hope we can go ahead and get that out to the public so that they'll know what's going on there. A couple of the questions, we've alluded to it several times, but we don't know how many teachers have decided they're simply not coming back, do we? I know we have maybe a percentage, I'm not real sure.
Well, we have ordinary resignations and retirements, and we certainly know that number. Now, when we roll out the plan of here's how we will approach being in school, might that influence some others to want to resign? I don't know. Would hope not. Would hope the plan is reassuring to employees.
Okay, so that's understandable. Other measures that we might be taking or could take with respect to safety in the classrooms. One of the ones that keeps popping through my mind, and it's not UV lights. It is plastic measures like they have at the banks and wherever you go. Plastic shields in front of people. Has there been any thought to trying to come up with some sort of way to shield students who are sitting next to each other without having to go full 6 feet? Forgetting how much it would cost, obviously, but.
Well, obviously there's some cost to it. The other thing is the practicality of that. what would hold those shields in place? What keeps the child from knocking them over? You get into those practical things. Just a very anecdotal record of that. I happened to be in a place yesterday that had one of those up in front of the register where you check out, and even though the clerk was wearing a mask, I had one on, and there's this plexiglass shield and little clips down there holding it in place. Fell over, even though it had a partition there. So,
yeah,
while it might offer some additional protection, in fact, we're certainly relying on that to protect people in the office from visitors coming into the school. But when we looked at that, it's really not been much of a practical application to get a larger number of students in the room or in the building, because it doesn't protect you in transitions. And that's another concern if you load it up. In a 1 or a 2, we're controlling the number of people in there within the ability to keep them so many feet apart. It's when you get to a 5 that those barriers might be helpful in a 5, but then you got so many people in there transitioning in and out, and the barrier doesn't help them when they start to transition.
Yeah, okay. And I assume you could do like we're doing in restaurants and places. You wear the mask, or in work office. Whenever you're up from your desk at the office in your cubicle, then you wear a mask. Those are all considerations. I just want to be able to say, yes, we've looked at that, we've thought about it, we've tried all the options, and it just won't work. If that's what we're going to say, that's helpful.
Yes,
Yeah, I think the question already was asked about might some of the teachers who don't want to be in the classroom be willing to act as either substitutes or online teachers. It looks like about 9 to 10% people have opted for, and that's, I guess, as of a couple of weeks ago, is that right? Opted for e-learning or virtual learning versus, I assume 90% haven't. I don't know.
I believe it's about 9% as of this morning.
Okay.
And again, our deadline's not till the 27th, so I suspect that number will go up, percentage go up.
And the reason I ask that is I guess we need some pretty strong answers to the rest of the 90% as to why they're not going to be able to go to school. And all of these things we're talking about are there, but it would sure help if we had a long, a full blown document or whatever it is that says, here is why you're not going to be back in school in August. Now, I assume too, we talked about going from either the 14th or the 17th or the 17th to the 24th. Have we thought, given any consideration to wait until, say, the end of August, September 1st or even September 15th, for getting all of the implications that go with the state requirements for seat time and all that kind of thing? I know you alluded to, but I didn't get the full gist of it.
Yeah, we talked internally about 1 week later, 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later would be the last one you mentioned, which puts us past Labor Day. We didn't believe that we would get significantly more information. Hopefully, if we go 1 week as far as getting more information, that gives us at this point about 6 weeks worth of trend opportunity. If it's not starting to trend down by then, not sure that another week or 2 would matter. The biggest thing is for us to be able to make an adjustment in staffing between virtual and regular school with a minimal disruption to students in either place. And the other is, if we stay in that 1 week delay, we don't extend the school year past our already announced end date, which then creates other problems for families. So it appeared to give us the most information, the most opportunity to get things aligned correctly, and have the least negative impact on families in the community.
Okay. I think you've already addressed this one as if we're in the full 5-day or any of those options, can a person who is in school at some point or at any time opt into or out of school into the virtual program? I know coming back into the school would be a little more difficult, but can you opt out of in school into virtual at any time?
Yes, it's kind of the same circumstance. It would be space available, but likely there might be a little more opportunity for space on the virtual side than in the bricks and mortar, because virtually you're going to have a little bit larger course load than you would in the bricks and mortar. So, but again, we wouldn't want to move students except at a logical time to move them, because they'd be changing teachers and changing where they are in the subject matter. So it'd be better for them to go on a 9 weeks break or semester break.
Okay. Moving along here, back to the comment you made about only 84 students had no contact with their teachers. And I would imagine the vast majority of those are because the students were not contactable. But I have to ask this question for no reason other than I have one parent, and you may have gotten copies of it, who said, I had tried 3 times to contact my teacher and couldn't do it, and blah, blah, blah. You know how that goes. What are we talking about when we say contact versus no contact? Is contact, we texted them and said, how you doing, okay? Or is it more like a video conference or a phone conference? What do we mean about having contact with these students? Was there a definition of it?
Contact at the classroom or school level had to do with that they hadn't done any work. In other words, they neither electronically or on paper, that they were not hearing from these students.
Okay. So you said that students hadn't contacted the teachers, not the other way around.
Yes. Now the expectation was for teachers to be in contact with students, but if they can't get the student, in other words, they couldn't get in touch with the student wasn't returning work, then it would have gone from the class, from the teacher to the principal, to the district, to the school administration. Then if the principal and their staff had that same issue, it would have kicked up to student services. That's how we got the number and percentage way down, is because of all those levels of intervention and utilizing people ultimately at the district level to track these folks down.
Okay, thank you. So the 84 students that had no contact, they were that group that had gone all the way up through the process, and you still couldn't get in touch with them.
That is correct. Now that's grades 3 through 12.
Okay.
But there was not a huge number in grades K1 and 2 either. Okay. We were way under the state average.
Okay. Moving on without taking too much time. Talked about the feedback that you got from parents in these meetings, these virtual meetings or whatever they were with 150 parents and so forth. Do you have just a general overview? What was the feedback you got from parents?
They're working on compiling all that now. We'll be glad to share that with you, because what we'll do with all 150, because they couldn't answer every question during the Zoom conference and call, they will send the answers to the questions back to all the parent participants. We'll be glad to share that with you.
You can share that with us. I mean, it doesn't have to be, it can be anonymous, but you can share that with us as well.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We'll share that with you.
Okay. Same thing for teachers, I guess, would be the thing. That's that one already. Yeah, here's 50% capacity on buses. Instead of 45 minutes late, we're going to be an hour and a half late or whatever. How do we plan to get these students to and from school if we can only have 50% of the buses full?
We believe on a 1, we're going to be fine with transportation. It might be a little bit of a challenge on a 2. And on a 5, there is no way to do that and them not be significantly late arriving and significantly late getting home.
Yeah. So I hesitate to ask this with Doug not being on the call, but I'll mention it anyway because I've heard it time to. If we don't follow a DHEC or a CDC guideline and a kid gets COVID, how many lawsuits are we going to have?
Well, I guess I'll defer that question to the two of you that are attorneys, or to Doug Webb, who I think is listening in. But I think you kind of know the answer to that. There's probably not a limit to the number of people that might exercise their opportunity to access the court system. And of course, we don't make decisions based primarily on incurring liability, but it certainly is a consideration, because at the end of the day, the taxpayer has to pay to defend any lawsuit that's brought against us. And if we run contrary to the sound advice of experts, I think we run the risk of not just having a lawsuit, but perhaps having a successful lawsuit brought against us.
And I think that's a point I think we need to at least be aware of in the background. My guess is we could get bankrupted. And by the way, it's not 2 attorneys, it's 1.5 on the board. This particular attorney is not even licensed in this state and hasn't been in a courtroom in more than 35 years. He just likes to pontificate about legal issues. But I see Doug's here now as well. He may have some further information. Is it inappropriate to tell a parent part of the reason we're concerned? Somebody's got some background. And by the way, it's not 2 attorneys, it's 1.5. Oh, Doug, you might want to mute your phone here a little bit. Is it inappropriate for us to tell parents we've got to be aware of the fact that if we don't follow the recommendations of DHEC and others, is it inappropriate to tell a parent part of the reason we're concerned? I'm having to listen to myself 5-second delays here. Is it inappropriate to tell parents we have to be concerned about lawsuits? I'll just leave it that way. Is it inappropriate for us to tell parents we've got to be aware of the fact that if we don't follow the recommendations of DHEC and others?
To me, that's obviously a secondary concern to the health and safety of students and employees. But it is certainly a legitimate concern.
And I think, and there is feedback on my feed for some reason, but let me just comment. I think I want to echo Dr. Royster's statement. I'm still hearing the echo, but it is a concern. But I will say that the safety, health, welfare, educational advancement will be the driving force of our decisions. And we will handle any sort of individual lawsuit as they come. I think the important thing is to focus on the students' well-being, the bigger picture of education. And, you know, we have been sued for different reasons all the time, and we will handle this. And certainly we don't want to put anyone at risk, teachers, staff, any individuals, and we'll focus on the well-being of students as we navigate the path forward.
Okay, I got muted, but I just have 2 more questions. I'll leave it at that. If we how's the best way to put this? If we are trying to do 5 days, what is our option? And I know you mentioned we can't do it. So if we cannot get kids to school on time, much less in a class together at one point, it seems like to me if DHEC, and we felt comfortable with it for getting DHEC's approval, but if DHEC and or the Board of Education says it's okay to fill your buttons up, if everybody Thank you, Pat. If we decide to do that, has there been any indication or any approach or any lobbying, I should say, and maybe it's not appropriate to lobby DHEC on something like this, I don't know. But is DHEC aware of the problems they're putting us in if we're trying to go back to school? And is there any chance that they might give us some sort of or change the rules about distancing?
I think there's a likelihood that they might change that if we were in a very low spread, which then could equate to being in school 5 days a week.
Okay.
And while we certainly want to listen to health and medical experts, we've also taken every opportunity to let them know when you say these things, these are the concerns that it creates. For example, if DHEC and the CDC say you should maintain 6 feet of social distancing, the size of our classroom and the configuration of those rooms and the capacity of the schools, you cannot have every child there and maintain 6 feet. It's physically impossible.
Yes.
So you got to be either a quarter or a half of the students there if you're going to maintain 6 feet. And DHEC and CDC are still both recommending mask and 6 feet of social distancing. So that, we tried to communicate to them, when you say these things, here is the result. You need to tell us what's the safe thing to do health-wise and from a medical perspective, but we're telling you, here's the practical translation of that. If we do that, this is what it means.
And I've tried to tell a couple of parents, look, this isn't our making. It's not our making that we can't get kids into school. Some of this is because of regulations, and we cannot ignore the regulations or the recommendations or the guidelines. So if you have a problem with that, you're singing to the choir if you're talking to us. Maybe you need to be talking to somebody else. One in particular is lawsuit abuse and limitations of liability, particularly for COVID, if nothing else. The folks down there in Columbia, i.e. our legislative delegations, everybody's delegations, seem to be 100% sitting on their hands. Is there any chance they're liable to provide some lawsuit relief with respect to going back to school? And do we have any position, either us or the School Board Association, on that?
I wouldn't speak to the School Board Association position on it. There was at least some attempts at the federal level to create some protection, some legal protection in this environment. There has been discussion in our state at the state level about tort reform in years past. I'm not aware of a specific push at this point. Julie Horton's not on the call with us this morning. I'll be glad to have her look into that and share any information she might have with the board in a follow-up memo.
Okay. Last question I've got is directed to Linda. What happened to your painting behind you? Is it back straight again? Looks all cockeyed from here. Can't hear you, Linda, but that's fine. That's all right.
We're going to Mr. Meek. Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Linda. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Couple of questions, Burke, and then some more questions, I guess. If we have the 1 day a week, 2 days a week, or whatever, I'm assuming that the students will need to have their textbooks in the classroom with them, and then will they all need to take them home each day for the virtual learning the other days at school?
They should have few hardback textbooks or cloth-bound textbooks. Almost all of our textbooks are now available virtually. So I think, I don't know if Jeff's still on here because he's got a commitment with the teacher forum at 11:30. He can speak more specifically as to the directions about handling that, but we want to minimize their contact with any kind of materials like that. And like I said, almost all of the textbooks they use now are available online.
Okay, how are we handling the students at Washington Center? How are they going to be taken care of?
That program may look a little different, as you would imagine, from a regular school program. We may have them in more frequently than on a 1 or a 2 because of the nature of those students. On the flip side of that, because of the nature of some of those students, there might be more of them at home than in Washington Center on a given day. That happens during the course of a regular year. But because of the small number and the very, very low ratio of students to adults, we can do things there that are not possible with the staffing in a regular school.
Okay. In a classroom for virtual students, how many students are in the classroom, will be are in that class?
We're looking at finalizing that right now. In the lower grade, in the lower grades, it will be more closely aligned to the regular school classroom. In the upper grades, it will be a larger number because, as you can imagine, there are a lot of management things that teachers do every day in a real classroom setting, a bricks and mortar setting, that these teachers will not have to do. Their time will be more purely spent on instruction. We'll go ahead and send you kind of our guidelines on that. I don't have them right in front of me, They are less than most of the charter virtual programs that we've looked at online, but they're still larger than our bricks and mortar numbers.
Okay, in the virtual school, since these students will be home, or the most of them will be home, how are the teachers going to handle intervention from the parents while they're teaching?
I'm not sure I'm following your question, Mr. Wick. Could you ask it a little differently, perhaps?
Okay, since the students will be home and they will be doing the virtual learning, and I know that some parents will want to talk with the teachers while the class is going on. How does the teacher? How do you assume that's going to happen, or what's going to happen?
I think that's one of those things that, as Mr. McCoy talked about earlier, in doing training with teachers, that's something we're going to have to train teachers at how they might handle that. Because I kind of gather from that, your point might be, you know, unlike in regular school, they can't just walk down the hall and stick their head in the door and interrupt what the teacher's doing. But doing this, they could walk into the camera range and stick their head in between what the teacher's doing, who might also be working with other students. I guess that was that sort of your point there. And that's just something we're going to have to help teachers learn how to manage. And they'll have to set expectations for that. And I think those expectations will have to be, because this is a different setting, that should be viewed as an opportunity when properly managed, rather than interference if it's not properly managed.
Okay. If we have teachers, when it is time to go back to school, if it's the 17th or 24th of August, and they feel very uncomfortable for whatever reason to go back to the classroom, and there's not an opening for them in the virtual classroom, what are the options for the teachers?
They don't fall into either a leave, as is approved in the board policy, or a valid leave under the COVID Act. They have very few options. We're obviously not going to create unsafe conditions. Everything we're doing, as you can see, is in accord with CDC and DHEC guidance. So it should be providing a safe environment. That, you know, if they just have some feelings of that they're not safe, we can get them some help through the employee assistance program. But just being uncomfortable, unfortunately, is not going to be able to be a reason for you not to be present and doing your job, unless you have one of those validated, substantiated reasons that aligns with either our policy or the COVID leave.
Okay, I received a copy of email. I don't know if it's on Facebook or where, and they had some questions from teachers. One of the questions was, if a teacher tests positive, are they required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? And is their sick leave covered or paid?
They're required to quarantine. That would be covered by sick leave and actually covered by the COVID leave as well. The question about being quarantined is one we are still awaiting guidance from DHEC on an exposure other than the one I described to you. As you might imagine, we've had people exposed throughout the summer. They're just not in a classroom or school setting. They're employees that work through the summer. And the latest guidance that we received last night is the example that I shared with you all earlier about if a spouse tested positive and the spouse living in the house, not the one who tested positive, is our employee, then that person could end up being quarantined for 24 days. Now, we do not yet have clear guidance from DHEC as to a positive test for a student, how that might affect the class or the teacher. We just do not yet have final guidance from them on that. But I think that might be one of the, I believe that's one of those challenges we listed at the first. And it's a big challenge, and we've got to have that moving forward.
Well, one of the leading into the next question, if that teacher has 5 classes a day that tested positive with 30 students in each, do all 150 of those students need to then stay home and quarantine for 14 days.
Now, that's another question that requires that clarification and further guidance from DHEC. We have not received that yet.
Okay, next question. Do all 150 of those students now have to get tested? Who pays for those tests? Are they happening at school? How are the parents being notified? Does everyone in each of those kids' families need to get tested? And who pays for that?
The same answer to every one of those, other than the question about testing.
Okay.
You can be tested free at multiple locations throughout the county now, including a cooperative effort with emergency preparedness and health providers that we have several sites on our school campuses where you can go and be tested, and they do not require referral from a doctor.
Okay, so you've already seen these questions?
No, sir, I haven't already seen those, but we have some like that, and all the ones that you read out, except the one about, getting a test, those are questions that we need guidance from DHEC. What is the implication if the teacher's positive and the students were exposed to that teacher? What's the implication if a student's positive for other students and for the teacher? Given the circumstances we have in place, i.e. we have social distancing, the teacher's wearing a mask, those are directions we have not yet received from DHEC. That is a big missing piece of what we need to have.
Are you also looking at bus drivers? If one of those shows up positive, do all the students have to be quarantined? Do all the other bus drivers, like at the bus center, I know down at Donaldson, they're all in one small room there they congregate in. Have you been looking at that, or I guess?
Right now, the guidance for adults, now this is guidance for adult employees, what we're operating under right now. If you are doing as you were instructed as an employee, i.e. you've maintained 6 feet of social distance from any other employee, and when you were not able to do so, you were wearing a mask, you followed all those rules. An exposure to another employee following those same rules who test positive does not necessarily mean that you would need to be tested or that you would be excluded from work.
Okay, they have quite a few more questions in there, but they're along the same line of who's going to be tested and things like that. And Burke, unfortunately, I have a lot of time and I've watched a lot of the news programs, as several of us have. And I think Ms. Morrison-Farrer mentioned earlier why we didn't look at the virtual program for everyone first and go with that to start the school up with, and then maybe slowly going back to the 1 or 2 or 4 days or whatever, 5 days. I did not hear the response, so could you go over that again?
Well, we want to operate under the philosophy that a regular school experience is the best thing for most all students. So our goal is to have all students in that sort of experience. Given the rate of infection, which changed rapidly in the month, from the beginning of the month of June to the beginning of the month of July, it appeared very unlikely that we could enter in anything except a 0 or a 1. So as we look to having students in a regular school experience, we're going to have to start with what's safest. That might be 0. It might be 1. I don't think we'd want to start, given the current circumstances, we would not want to start at a 2. We need to get those students in and make sure they understand all the procedures, that teachers have had an opportunity to work with them, to get to know them, that sort of thing. So to have assumed that we just start everybody virtually, I think that would have made us ill prepared had we continued to have a decrease positive test. And it also would have left us ill prepared to shift back and forth as we might need to do as this disease waxes and wanes during the school year. Now, turns out what we're likely going to be looking at is a 0 or a 1, unless the efforts that individuals are putting forth is going to make a significant difference in the next 6 weeks. Now, what they did, starting from about Memorial Day till the end of June, it made a significant difference in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
So if they will do things that need to be done in the next 6 weeks, they could make a significant difference in a positive direction.
I'm sorry.
It just seems to me that because of the actions of many people in South Carolina, I don't, and the leadership that we're being told certain things, I'm not nowhere comfortable of us beginning students in a classroom, even in the last of August. So, I tell you and everyone else, my vote, if I had a vote, we absolutely keep the kids home until we all felt much safer, and the rate was much lower than the positive rate that it is now. And I know that I do not have a vote on this, but I'm saying that my feelings is I'm not comfortable with sending my grandchildren back to school, and they have already opted for the virtual, or anybody else's children or grandchildren back to school in this climate. And I don't, I hear all the reasons, all the understandings, and all the advantages, disadvantages, but I think it's a great disadvantage to send students back in what I feel will be in harm's way. And I don't feel that, we have to take it up on ourselves as school board members who have much more information than the general public does to make this decision. So I'm telling you up front, and the others, that my vote is not to start students back to school in brick and mortar schools on August the 17th or August the 24th. I think we need much longer time to let it level out. Thank you, and I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Mr. Meade.
So noted.
Thank you, Mr. Meade. Dr. Cristobal O'Connor, please.
Yes, I agree with Roger on that, by the way. I've got a few questions that I'll try to be quick about, and I thank you for your patience in spending this much time. Have you looked at adding instructional time to the students over the course of the year to offset how far behind they already are and will become? And it seems to me that when we are having to do all these changes, one of those changes under consideration might need to be additional, longer days or more days. And you've said that you've already set the outside limit for when we would stop. So I just want to know if you're considering how we can get more time to these kids this year.
We have that 5-day window that's funded by the state, but they will fund only in-person instruction. One of the other things that we're going to probably have to do is, although not excluding other things, but we're going to have to primarily focus on core academics. The first thing we got to do is assess where we are so we know what we need to do to so to speak, catch up. One of the other things we'll have the opportunity to do, particularly with younger students, we should be able to carry forward the funds that we have for summer reading camps. We had a little carry forward from last year. We should have this year's amount, but we would be allowed to carry forward to add to next summer's amount to increase the number and frequency of summer reading camps for students. The rest of that is we need a better assessment on exactly where our students are, particularly those that are on a continuum. Less important with high school students, a little bit, certainly more important with middle school, and extremely important in elementary. where you have things building sequentially one upon another from one year to the next. There's less sequential building in high school than there is in middle school and elementary. But we're certainly looking at those things. Again, anything we do, if we add days or time to teachers, then there is a corresponding cost to that, a financial cost.
Sure.
And we are certainly now convinced more than ever we might be okay getting through this year, but FY22 is going to be a huge revenue adjustment for us, we believe.
Okay, the second thing is authority. One thing is you said you're hoping the high school league will come with a recommendation. What if they came with a recommendation that was outside the guidance that we're following, and they said, go ahead as usual? What would we do if we're saying, well, we're going to wait to see what the high school league recommends if they're using different criteria for how they decide? Or are they using the same that we're using?
They have sought input from every superintendent. They've sought input from every high school principal, and they've sought input from athletic directors. So they have all that input. They have whatever medical information they receive from the sources that they receive it. Now, I couldn't speak specifically to who that might be. And they certainly have the DHEC and the CDC information. And the appeal that we made directly to them in writing was to create a system where you're recognizing and responding to this low, medium, and high spread, and where you're creating an equitable situation for all student athletes throughout the state. And I hope they will choose to act on that and not give guidance, but act on it. If it's this, we're going to do this. If it's this, we're going to do this. We'll know tomorrow, hopefully, what action, if any, they'll take. Right now, it's left up to the individual district, and our district, along with really probably the districts that represent more than 30% of the students in the state, put a halt on conditioning. There was another group of districts that hadn't even begun conditioning that hasn't started it. I believe Richland 1 and Richland 2 and Georgetown, among others, have never even started conditioning. So we're not out there alone in what we're doing, but it doesn't need to be, there doesn't need to be individual decisions, in my opinion. When all these communities are rated the same by DHEC, then at that point, it should become a high school league decision.
Right, I get that, but what if they said, start practices tomorrow? Would you be able to go back and say, we are not allowed to do that according to the guidelines we're following?
They can't compel us to do something. They can compel us not to do something. Does that make sense?
Okay. So now the other question of authority relates to Ms. DeVos and others who will remain unnamed up there. What if they say, you must open school, or we won't fund you? Whose authority? Is it still the local authority, just as you've outlined in this presentation, that guides our decision-making? And we will not take anyone's superimposing a command if our guidelines show that we are at super high risk and cannot put kids back in there without really compromising our community and our kids' health.
As you pointed out, at this point, that remains a local decision. Now, education is a state function. And so our state could act to compel us to do something or not. South Carolina is a strong legislative state, so that might, under most circumstances, have to come from the legislature. Mr. Webb has sent you some information for your consideration about authority at the local and state level. But that's really where it rests. There is no federal authority to compel a district to have school or not have school. Now, there are federal funds, primarily for special education students,
Title
I economically disadvantaged students, and for the U.S. Department of Agriculture School Food Service Program. Those are the three large sources of federal funds. We have some other smaller ones. They constitute a very small portion of our budget, but they provide for very important functions on the part of the district. Those funds are appropriated by Congress. It appears highly unlikely that the Secretary of Education or the executive branch could redirect a congressional appropriation for which Congress has provided the guidance and the direction.
Okay, so is it similarly true that if our governor says that he's really going to try to put a stop to this community spread by closing the bars an hour early, if he comes in and says you need to go back to school, is it the same thing? You're saying it's more of a legislative change that could affect us than just an executive order kind of thing?
Because we're a strong legislative state, the argument certainly could be made as a valid one that the legislature could act to direct schools as a function of the state.
Okay.
They create school districts, in fact. They certainly could act and legislate something be done, given, following their appropriate procedures for enacting legislation. The authority of the governor is more related to the governor's ability to issue emergency orders. And without trying to go into that in this setting, I believe that Mr. Webb has provided you some legal opinion related to how that might look and the likelihood that that would be something that would happen.
Okay. And I think I read Gary Smith's one of his responses to an email or something. It sounded like he was a little bit questioning why are some districts doing things this way and that. And I'm not clear enough to recall it, but I hope we're communicating with our delegation in a manner that you feel they understand very clearly where you're coming from and the work you're doing to make sure that you're making the very best possible decisions for Greenville County. And I just wonder, do you feel like they're listening and that we're providing that information to them?
Yes, we provide information to them. We respond to the questions that they ask, and they've certainly been very receptive to the responses that we've provided with them or to them. They may or may not agree with some of those, but they always share their concerns, they share their questions, and we provide them answers and information. And again, we provide them the basis on which we have made decisions.
Okay. The last thing is about masks, and it's the most important thing that I see out there. You kind of alluded to it, but we've got all these demands coming from people in very hostile ways. And when I get one of those communications that is very hostile, I always find a way to ask them if they personally are wearing masks. And the answer is no. So I want to say, is there a way to communicate? If you want students to return to school on as normal a schedule as possible, the community, the way the community can move toward that is by following these protocols. If the community does not follow these protocols, then likely we will not see schools reopening normally. I don't believe people see the connection to their own behavior and the opening of school. And and then they make the statement, no one will require me to wear a mask. Well, those same people are going to say, I fear no one will require my child to wear a mask. So are we prepared to say, as I wish, for example, restaurants would, if you want to come in, you're going to have a mask on, and you're going to sit at a social distance. And then you'll see others that have none of that going on. How can we make our community members understand that participation is conditional on following the rules that we set in place for safety for themselves and their children if they're going to walk through the school doors?
Well, we've made that. We've made that point in multiple releases to the media and in individual communication with parents. You know, the ability to go back. The state superintendent's made that point. We've made that point. The desire to open school, the ability to go back, the ability to have athletics, the ability to have college football, all those things rest on us curbing this increase. And all the medical people say the way to do that is wearing of a mask. So we're continuing to communicate that. Specifically, if we are opening where we need to maintain social distancing and masks, we will have, and you'll see it in our draft plan, here's how we address those who choose not to comply. Now, if they don't comply because you're a younger child, we need to do some more work with them, that's one thing. Defiance is another thing.
Right.
The end result of that would be you would end up finding yourself assigned to the virtual school.
Okay.
It's a full school program. It's not like being assigned like to the alternative school. They're not things that you would lose by being in it. So the ultimate answer might be at some point, we're going to say that we're going to have to go to virtual school. If you don't want to wear a mask, then you can sit at home and learn virtually. That might end up being the option.
And it might be, I mean, what would be wrong with saying that now? You know,
we are saying that it will be in that draft document.
Oh,
It'll
good.
be in the plan. Yes.
Because I'm thinking I'd love to offer those people who really don't want their children to be having to wear a mask the virtual option and let them know very specifically, you know, until this COVID virus is behaving in a way that would allow full-time return to school by all children, our kids are going to be wearing masks. And if you don't want that for your child, then go ahead and take the virtual option. I mean, it just
they will see, to your point, they will see in that plan, here are the consequences for not wearing the mask. And so if you can't comply with that, to your point, then you probably need to sign up for the virtual program.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all, Ms.
Yes, it
Dr.
is.
Crystal
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Grayson?
Thank you, Linda. So my questions pertain to the flow of information to the public. Can we share the PowerPoint with the public when we receive it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it is public.
Yes.
Can we put that timeline that you've provided on the district's homepage? In other words, starting with yesterday's efforts to get this plan, to show what we're doing on this day-by-day basis. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nancy's finding it.
Anything that's in this document is public. And in fact, we're gonna send the document out to our employees actually. So anything in here you can feel free to use in any way that you'd like to use, and we'll be glad to link it on our website.
Okay, I think just a one-page timeline would be extremely helpful, including the fact that the South Carolina High School League is going to meet tomorrow. And I'd also like to see a copy of our letter to the high school leagues requesting guidance. I think that
I'll be glad to have Ms. Fitzer send that out to you later. I'm gonna hand this off to her for just a minute.
So I just did want to let you know the presentation is already on board docs. It's been on board docs since the meeting started. And it's been actually updated in the middle of the meeting. We found a couple of typos. So just hit refresh before. So it's there in PDF form. You can share that with whoever you want, but we will also send it out in an email. And then that timeline, we can share that as well with the public.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. And then the other question I had was these Facebook Live videos. Can we do one where Tim or Terry or somebody discusses the Harvard data and the Johns Hopkins data and something besides DHEC? Because a lot of people, and of course, no matter what you put in front of them, a lot of people aren't going to listen to the data. But I think that a general 10-minute interview of all of the resources that we are consulting to make these decisions would be helpful. And then the last question I had is just about the the mechanics of these decisions. So if I understand correctly, the schedule is going to be released to the public on July 21st. And then the board is going to meet 2 weeks later on August 4th to have an up-down vote on it.
Most likely, once all of the data is collected and we have enough information to where Dr. Royster will come to us and say, okay, we need to have a meeting because we need to allocate X amount, blah, 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 blah. Okay?
And that will be an up-down vote on the schedule as well, whether it's one day,
Yeah.
2 days.
Yes, it will be a Zoom conference, but we will let you know probably on July 28th, 29th for sure about the August 4th meeting, but just plan for August 4th. It's not
set in stone.
Exactly. So just know that.
Okay.
But we certainly appreciate your flexibility with that, because again, we think we might have some financial considerations. And what we probably are going to ask you to do is support within that framework of low, medium, high, not necessarily a fixed point in each one, but some options within each one.
Okay, and that's basically the nature of my question is that, DHEC's going to be updating these numbers every Monday, and going forward, who's making these decisions? Because we can't meet every Monday and decide whether we're going to open schools on Tuesday. So that most of my questions that I get from parents are who's making the decision and when. And so
what we'd like to do is get you all to approve a framework that might, for example, be in a high. It would be a 0 or a 1 that would administratively we'd make that decision within a high, looking at all the factors. At a medium, it would be a 1 or a 2, and in a low, it could be a 2 or a 5. And sort of you all would have approved within that range. And again, us taking into consideration information that we not only get that information weekly, obviously you can watch it daily, following the DHEC report by county and that sort of thing, to be as responsive as we can possibly be to, one, ensure safety, and also to ensure that we're providing opportunities that are appropriate to provide, and to be able to respond quickly to each of those. And again, the guidance within the document we're talking about, the plan, is 52 pages, not including the documents that are linked to it. And things within that could change based on guidance from outside or our own experience with dealing with things. So that plan to best protect and support our students and staff has to be flexible and nimble.
Okay, I understand that. So basically the board, what will be presented to the board is a grid or a table, and we will operate according to that table.
Yeah, that would be another way to look at it. Yes.
So we won't have to revise the framework. It's going to be designed in a way where the measures are clear, and you won't have to come back to the board and say, okay, Monday we're going to do this, and then the following Monday we're going to do this, because what gets released on the 21st may differ from what it looks like on August 4th as far as your recommendations.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That clarifies it for me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson. Mr. Shamley?
Yes, just following up on that, I just made a note to myself. You're going to release the final document on the 21st, and we're not going to meet again until the 24th. Until August the 4th. Is that document going to be a final plan, or what's going to be included in that document with respect to how school starts?
That July the 21st will have all the information about each scenario. We've already established that we've got an opportunity for a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 5. So it'll have everything lined up, 0, 1, 2, 5. What does every aspect of school, instructional and operational, what does it look like? Yeah. And it will have what we would share with you for your approval, so forth. Simply the part about, well, within a low spread, a medium spread, and a high spread, based on the DHEC CDC guidance, accelerated task force recommendations, the medical information we've gotten. But we believe that within this, you could either do this or this. You could do this or this. You could do this or this. That would be the part that we would want your approval on the 4th. We also believe by then, if we needed to ask for one-time allocation from either fund balance or more likely from the COVID relief money to add some teaching positions to ensure we're appropriately staffed at the virtual school. We need some more money for sanitizer. We'd have all that information lined up by August the 4th to say to you, we need to do these 3 things as well. But we want to get the document out so that parents understand this is what we're looking at. This is what's likely going to happen, to your point that you made earlier, on July the 21st, so they can make a decision before July the 27th if they want to go to the virtual program.
Right. Good.
And then that gives us time from July the 27th to August 4th to say, all right, we no longer now need, as of yesterday, we needed 139 teachers. Maybe now we need 250 teachers for the virtual program. Gives us some time to work with those numbers. So we're not coming in there asking you for $500,000 when we might need $1.2 million, or we're asking you for $3 million when we might need $850,000. The better we can do with that, the better off we all are.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Linda, I said 2 questions, but you know how that goes. And I will keep it very brief. Along the lines of who has the authority to shut us down or make us go, South Carolina Constitution requires the state to educate our kids. So I think ultimately the legislature can tell us we must or we may not teach in school or how that has to be. Now, that may or may not be a good thing. I just think that authority-wise, that's, to me, seems where that has to come from. And if they don't do anything, then I think it's up to us to do what we think is best. Just a question. I think I asked you the other day, Dr. Burke, and I forgot your answer, but maybe you can answer this. I asked you about, is there any thought to split days? High school seniors go 4 hours in the morning, and then they swap, and other high school seniors go 4 hours in the afternoon. Do you know of any other counties maybe that have looked at that, or has anybody thought about that as a possibility to get around some of the problems with getting people to and from school?
Well, there are probably some places that have done that. Some school districts have had to do that as a matter of routine where they had the lack of facilities.
Right.
The problem is it doubles your transportation issue.
Sure.
So we're better off to go alternate days than to go half a day and half a day. When we look at all the upside and the downside, there's more upside to going a full day, but not every day, than there is going a half day every day. And then with younger children, it creates the same issue. It just arranges it differently in that they got to have somebody to watch their child for the other half of the day.
Okay.
It just kind of rearranges that concern or need.
But if it looked like we could go 5 days and we still couldn't get more than half the students on a bus, that might, at least it would seem theoretically possible that other half goes in the afternoon. You could have the elementary school students go all day long, but if somebody looked at that, that's all I need to be aware of if that's already been referred to. With respect to go or no go, I may have to respectfully sort of disagree with, halfway to disagree with Roger and Crystal in that I think the way it's being set up, if you don't have a problem sending your kids to school, whichever way it is, 2, 4, 5, 1, or whatever, that's your decision. If you are like Roger and Crystal and others, and you don't like that, you spent a whole heck of a lot of time putting together a virtual program that you can elect as well. So I'm not sure, frankly, if you don't want to send your kids to school, it looks like under this scenario, you don't have to send them to school. If you really, really, really want and need to send your kids to school, then it looks like what you're at least trying to get us to is a point where you can send your kids to school. So I'm not sure what the problem is at the end of the day, although it's not a major issue. It's just a point of reference for me. High school league, we can overrule the high school league if they decide they want to start doing things right now. Is that correct, or at any time? If they're going to use
yes, sir.
We can say you cannot use school property for whatever you're trying to do if we disagree with it.
Well, we cannot do things that they prohibit. For example, they have all kinds of rules about open seasons and practices and that sort of thing. We can't elect to do things they prohibit. However, we're not required to do things they allow.
Yeah, right. Okay. And worst case scenario, we could say we're going to do this anyway, and we're going to totally revise the way we do sports and after school activities and all that. But that's sort of a different issue there. End of the day, I think it's important for us as soon as we, and I've said this before, as soon as we possibly can say, here's what our plan is to do. Unless conditions change significantly, whether it's good or bad, open or closed, 0, 1, 2, or 5. So I would hope we can really move towards having, here's the way this thing is going to be. And I think the 21st document won't necessarily have that. It'll still have a number of options. But I think we're getting perilously close to time for school to open. So I'd really like to encourage us to say, here's the plan. If this plan doesn't work by the time school starts, okay, that's the way snow days work. But here's the plan if nothing serious changes. And I want to emphasize and really encourage that as much as we can. So with that, I think I will be quiet for good.
Yes, Ms. Caldwell, good one.
I heard Dr. Royster say 1, 2, or 5. Isn't it true, Dr. Royster, that we have to get the numbers down in Greenville County in order for us to do a 5?
Yes, ma'am. In my opinion, they would have to be significantly down.
So why are we even putting a 5 on the table? Because we know that we are in the high category. And I know this is not a place to disagree or agree with other board members, but Mr. Shamley, I have to disagree with you on that, sending the kids to school, because you have to think about the staff and the faculties also. We have some teachers that are scared. They would be scared to come back and to teach some of the kids, but that's neither here nor there. But I wanted to ask that, why are we putting 5 on the table when we know that it's going to be either a 0 or 1? I don't think we should even mention 5.
Because we want people to know what we would do throughout the school year under every scenario, so they have that information. And I think we've tried to be very clear. We want to make sure that we continue to be. There's not any way under the current scenario that exists with the spread of COVID in our community that we would recommend doing a 5-day-a-week schedule.
So if we could recommend things to the community, and this is what I've been recommending to a lot of people, do what it takes to get us from a high level to a lower, medium level by wearing your mask, by social distancing, by using your sanitizer. But, I go to places and I see people, I can count on my hands the amount of people that have masks on. Yes. So if y'all want us to get in-person school for our kids, we're not going to put our kids in an unsafe situation. And if we are doing a Zoom call to determine things, why should we put the kids into a school when we're doing a Zoom call to make these decisions? I mean, we're not in person. So, I just wanted to speak my piece, and I'm going with a 0 with all virtual. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin Caldwell. I think all school board members are respectful of others. And I'd like to thank Dr. Royster for I think we went over 3 hours. Thank you, Dr. Royster. Thank you and your staff. And I think the 5, what I see as the 5 is, if for somebody has a magic wand and they had a wish and that came true, and we no longer had the virus, the vaccine, we came up with the vaccine that took care of everything, and we're back to some type of normalcy, that would be the 5 days a week. At this point, we're not even close to it. So thank you for all the options. Thank you for showing that there is a positive with this program, this 5-day option, and that we're trying to be positive and make good out of a interesting situation. So Dr. Royster, board members, thank you all, staff, Greenville County staff and teachers. We are very mindful of all of you, and I hope that you all have a great day. And with that being said, hearing no others, this is just an informative meeting. There is no action that is being taken or voted on. This is just information only. Dr. Royster, I will let you finish up with any comments very minimal comments, if you will.
But you can be off mute when you make them.
Dr. Royster, we cannot hear you. Are you there? See?
Yeah, I tried to unmute with my space bar and it seemed not to work. I was going to say, I got hungry about 15, 20 minutes ago, so I'm not talking long. I simply want to express my appreciation to each of you for your support in this process. Obviously, there's some feeling one way from board members about doing a certain thing and another way, but what I have sensed from every one of you is support for the effort that has gone into doing the planning, doing the work, and I very much appreciate that. And I appreciate your time and attention today as you had the opportunity to learn more of the details and ask questions about it. But the end of my comments and the end of our portion of this, we just very much appreciate your support and your ongoing support in this most unusual and trying set of circumstances. So thank each of you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Thank you, Nancy. Y'all have a great day.
Nancy.